Hello guys, welcome to Percy Fiction. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was the son of Poseidon, his chakra creating tsunamis and living water clones? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Maelstrom's Heart. The water knew him. That was the only way Naruto could describe the feeling. Here, at the edge of the great lake that bordered Konoha's western training grounds, the air was different. It was heavy with moisture, clinging to his skin like a second, cooler layer. The reeds at the shore didn't just rustle in the wind, they seemed to bend towards him, their slant, green bodies dipping into the water as if in deference. He sat on a smooth, gray stone, worn down by centuries of lapping waves, and watched the sun bleed orange and purple across the horizon. In the village, he was a ghost, a pariah, a walking blight that soured milk and drew whispers sharp enough to cut. The villagers' eyes, when they bothered to look at him at all, were flat and hard, like tones skipping across a surface too cold to break. He had tried everything: pranks, loud declarations, desperate pleas for attention, anything to shatter that suffocating wall of indifference and replace it with something, anything, else. But it never worked. The wall would just rebuild itself, thicker and colder than before. Out here, though, there was no wall. There was only the steady, rhythmic pulse of the lake. He could feel it in his bones, a low thrum that matched the beat of his own heart. He trailed his fingers in the water, and it felt like coming home. The cool liquid swirled around his hand, impossibly gentle. Before a small vortex, no bigger than his palm, formed in the water. It spun faster and faster, a perfect miniature whirlpool dancing at his command. He smiled, a rare, annoying thing that never quite reached his eyes. This was his secret, the one piece of him that wasn't broken or despised. Impressive. Naruto flinched, snatching his hand from the water as if burned. The whirlpool vanished instantly. He spun around, his body tensing for a fight or an insult. Mizuki-sensei stood a few feet away, leaning against a thick oak tree with a smile that didn't belong on his face. It was too wide, too friendly. It was the kind of smile people used when they wanted something. "Don't be shy, Naruto," Mizuki said, his voice smooth as polished river stones. "I've seen you out here before. You have a talent, a real connection to water style." Naruto stayed silent, suspicion coiling in his gut. Teachers from the academy didn't seek him out. They endured him. Iruka-sensei was the only exception. And even his kindness was often strained, tinged with a pity that felt almost as bad as the hate. "I know what they say about you in the village," Mizuki continued, pushing himself off the tree and taking a slow step closer. He kept his hands open, a gesture of peace that set Naruto's teeth on edge. "And I know about the academy. You failed the graduation exam." Again, the words were a physical blow. And Naruto's shoulders slumped. He had failed on the clone jutsu. It was always the clone jutsu. No matter how much chakra he poured into it, the result was always the same: a pale, sickly, half-dead thing that collapsed into a puddle of its own misery. It was a humiliation he had replayed in his mind 1,000 times. "It's not your fault," Mizuki said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You have too much chakra, Naruto. Far too much for a simple technique like that. It's like trying to fill a teacup with a waterfall. You're meant for bigger things." Naruto looked up, a flicker of hope warring with his ingrained distrust. "Bigger things. The Hokage. He means well," Mizuki said, sighing dramatically. "But he's old. He's cautious. He sees your power, and it scares him. He's holding you back, giving you impossible tasks like the clone jutsu so you'll never realize your own potential." The idea struck a chord deep within Naruto. It made a perverse kind of sense. He had always felt it, a boundless energy simmering just beneath his skin, a wellspring of power he could never quite tap. The old man was always kind, but there was a distance in his eyes. A watchfulness that had always made Naruto feel more like a caged animal than a person. What potential?" Naruto asked, his voice barely a whisper. Mizuki's smile returned, triumphant this time. "There's a way to unlock it. A way to bypass the Academy's foolishness and prove to everyone what you're capable of. There's a special scroll, hidden away for safekeeping. It contains a forbidden jutsu. One that can channel immense power. The Hokage is keeping it from you. But I can tell you where it is. He leaned in closer, his breath smelling of mint and deceit. Bring it to the old cabin in the clearing east of here. We'll learn it together. Then, no one will ever be able to ignore you again. The bait was perfect, crafted just for him. It wasn't about becoming a ninja anymore. It was about validation. It was about forcing the world to finally see him. The deep, instinctual part of him, the part that felt the thrum of the lake, screamed that this was a lie. But the lonely, desperate boy who lived on a diet of instant ramen and scorn wanted to believe it so badly he could taste it. An hour later, Naruto was running through the forest, a massive scroll strapped to his back. Getting it had been surprisingly easy. A quick transformation jutsu, a bit of faked urgency, and the archivist in the Hokage's library hadn't even blinked. The sheer size of the scroll was intimidating, but a fierce exhilaration sang in his veins. This was it. This was the moment his life would change. He burst into the designated clearing, a wide, grassy space with a dilapidated hunter's cabin at its center. The air here felt different from the lake, drier, stagnant. Mizuki was already there, waiting. You did it, Mizuki breathed, his eyes wide and fixed on the scroll. There was a hunger in his gaze that hadn't been there before. I knew you could. Quick, unroll it. Let's see what we have. Naruto carefully lowered the scroll to the ground and untied the bindings. He unrolled the first few feet of parchment, revealing complex diagrams and elegant, flowing script. It was a powerful sealing jutsu, he realized, not some explosive technique. He frowned. This doesn't look like what you described, sensei. Look closer, Mizuki urged, his voice tight. Before Naruto could react, a blur of motion streaked from the trees. Naruto, get away from him. Iruka landed between Naruto and Mizuki, his face a mask of fury and desperation. He had a deep gash on his arm, and his Chunin vest was torn. Mizuki, what is the meaning of this? Why did you lie to him? Mizuki laughed, a high, ugly sound that echoed in the quiet clearing. Lie. I told him the truth. I just left out the parts he wasn't ready to hear. He pointed a trembling finger at Naruto. You want to know why the village hates you, boy? Why they look at you with such contempt? 12 years ago, a great beast, the nine-tailed fox, attacked Konoha. It was a creature of pure malice, a walking apocalypse. It was defeated, but it couldn't be killed. So the fourth Hokage, our greatest hero, sealed it away. Mizuki paused, savoring the moment, his eyes glittering with manic glee. He sealed it inside a newborn baby. He sealed it inside you. Naruto, you were the nine-tailed fox in human form. The world tilted. The trees, the cabin, Iruka's horrified face, it all swam in a nauseating blur. The whispers, the glares, the loneliness, it wasn't just because they disliked him. They saw a monster. The monster that had killed their families, destroyed their homes. The monster that had murdered Iruka's parents. The monster that was living inside his own skin. Don't listen to him, Naruto. Iruka yelled, his voice cracking. You are not the beast. You are Naruto Uzumaki, a leaf shinobi. Oh, is that what he is? Mizuki sneered, pulling a massive shuriken from his back. He's a monster, and he has a monster's power. That strange affinity he has for water. The way it moves for him. That's the demon's chakra, leaking out, poisoning the world around him. I was trying to help him. I was going to teach him how to expel it, to finally be free of the curse. He was lying. Naruto knew it now, with a clarity that cut through the shock and pain. The feeling he got from the lake, that sense of peace and belonging, that wasn't a demon. That was him, and Mizuki wanted to twist it, to use it, just like everyone else. I'll take the scroll now, Mizuki said, spinning the giant shuriken. And I'll kill the demon. The village will thank me for it. He launched the weapon. It flew through the air, a silver wheel of death, aimed not at Iruka, but at him. Naruto froze, paralyzed by the weight of the revelation. But Iruka moved. He threw himself in front of Naruto, taking the full force of the shuriken in his back. He grunted, a wet, choking sound, and collapsed, pinning Naruto to the ground with his own body. Why? Naruto whispered, his voice trembling as he felt warm blood seeping through Uruka's vest onto his jacket. Because, Uruka gasped, his voice strained with pain. We're the same. After my parents died, I was alone. I acted out. I just wanted someone to see me. To know my name. I know how it feels, Naruto. I'm so sorry. I should have been there for you more. Tears streamed down Naruto's face, hot and silent. This was the first time. The first time someone had looked past the monster, past the prankster. And seen the lonely child underneath. And he was dying for him. Touching, Mizuki mocked, pulling a second shuriken. But it ends now. Die, Demon Fox. He hurled the weapon. But this time, Naruto moved. A raw, guttural roar tore from his throat. He shoved Uruka's body aside and threw himself backward, tumbling head over heels into the shallow creek that bordered the clearing. The cold water was a shock to his system. He landed on his back, fully submerged in the 2 feet of water, the world above distorted and blurry. Mizuki's laughter was a dull, garbled sound. Naruto could see his silhouette standing over Uruka, preparing for a final blow. Rage, pure and undiluted, washed through him. It was a rage born of a lifetime of solitude, of 1,000 whispered insults. Of one moment of kindness being threatened with extinction. He was so tired of being weak. So tired of being a victim. And in the water, he wasn't weak. He didn't panic. He didn't struggle for air. Submerged in the creek, a profound sense of calm settled over him, a deep, resonant certainty. The water wasn't trying to drown him. It was welcoming him. He felt the creek, not just the water touching his skin, but every drop. Every current, every molecule of hydrogen and oxygen from its source in the mountains to where it fed the Great Lake. And he felt the lake, too. A vast, sleeping giant of power. Connected to this tiny stream. It was all one body. And it was his body. He reached out with his senses, with his chakra, with something deeper and more primal than either. He pulled. Mizuki raised a kunai over Uruka's prone form. Goodbye, Uruka. You were always a fool, defending that. He never finished the sentence. A low rumble started, a vibration that came not from the sky, but from the earth itself. Mizuki paused, frowning. The ground began to shake, gently at first, then with increasing violence. The trees swayed as if in a hurricane, though the air was unnervingly still. He looked towards the west, towards the lake, and his eyes went wide with disbelief. The horizon was gone. In its place was a solid wall of dark blue, rising impossibly high into the twilight sky. It was the entire lake. Pulled from its bed, a mountain of water crowned with churning white foam, moving with silent, terrifying speed. It wasn't a jutsu. Jutsu required hand signs, shouted names. This was a force of nature. An act of God. What is that? Mizuki stammered, taking a stumbling step back. The tsunami didn't crash. It descended. The colossal wave crested over the forest, blotting out the stars. And fell upon the clearing. But it didn't obliterate everything. With an impossible, deliberate grace, the water walled off the clearing, creating a perfect circle of churning, liquid walls 100 feet high. Trees caught in its path were not broken, they were uprooted and absorbed into the swirling mass. The ground was scoured clean, leaving only mud and terrified silence. Mizuki stood frozen in the center of this aquatic arena, his face pale with terror. The water that had filled the creek bed had drained away, leaving Naruto standing in the mud. He wasn't gasping for air. He wasn't even wet. His clothes were damp, but his skin was dry. His blue eyes were no longer the color of the sky. They were the color of the deep ocean, and they glowed with a soft, internal luminescence. He didn't look angry. He looked serene. It was a terrifying serenity, the calm at the eye of a hurricane. What are you? Mizuki whispered, his voice trembling. Naruto didn't answer. He simply raised a hand. All around them, the puddles and pools of water left by the wave began to stir. The water shuddered, then rose. It coalesced into humanoid shapes, featureless and sexless, their bodies made of clear, churning water. They had no eyes, no mouths, but they all turned their heads towards Mizuki. 1, 2, then 5, then a dozen of them stood in a silent, dripping circle around the traitorous Chunin. One of the water clones took a step forward. Its movement was utterly fluid, a ripple made solid. It raised an arm, and the limb elongated into a high-pressure whip of water. It cracked through the air with the sound of a thunderclap, moving faster than the eye could follow. It wrapped around Mizuki's wrist, the one holding the kunai. Mizuki screamed, not from pain, but from the bone-deep cold that instantly leached the strength from his arm. The water whip solidified, turning to opaque, unbreakable ice. With a sharp tug, the clone disarmed him. Another clone moved in from the side. Its torso opened up, and a dozen thick tendrils of water shot out, wrapping around Mizuki's limbs, his waist, his neck. They pinned him, lifting him off the ground, his struggles becoming weaker and weaker as the unnatural cold sapped his will to fight. Naruto walked slowly towards him, his footsteps silent on the damp earth. He stopped in front of the suspended, helpless Chunin and looked up at him. The serene expression hadn't changed. "You were wrong," Naruto said, his voice quiet, yet it carried with absolute clarity in the enclosed space. "The power isn't the demon's. It's mine." He turned his back on Mizuki and walked to Iruka's side. He knelt, gently probing the wound. The shuriken was lodged deep, but it had missed his spine. He would live. A wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled him, washed through Naruto. The glowing in his eyes subsided, leaving behind an exhaustion that was bone deep. The immense walls of water that surrounded them wavered, then collapsed, not with a crash, but with a gentle sigh, the water flowing back towards the lake as if guided by an unseen hand. The water clones dissolved, melting back into harmless puddles on the ground. It was then that the Anbu arrived. They appeared in a silent circle of porcelain masks and drawn tanto blades. Their arrival was jarring, a stark intrusion of human order into a scene of primal chaos. They took in the scene: the muddy, scoured clearing, the grievously wounded Iruka, the whimpering, half-frozen Mizuki, and Naruto, kneeling at the center of it all, a child who looked impossibly small amidst the devastation. Then, the third Hokage walked into the clearing. Hiruzen Sarutobi's face was a grim, wrinkled mask. His usual grandfatherly warmth was gone, replaced by an expression of profound gravity. He surveyed the wreckage, his sharp eyes missing nothing. His gaze lingered on the impossible distance the waterline had receded from the lake, then on Naruto. It was not a look of pride, or even surprise. It was a look of deep, weary fear. The kind of fear a man has when a prophecy he has dreaded his entire life has just come true. "Naruto," Hiruzen said, his voice heavy. He wasn't speaking to a student. He was addressing a peer. An equal. A force. "What have you done?" From a branch high in an ancient, untouched cypress tree nearly a mile away, a figure watched the events conclude. He was massive, his frame stretching the seams of his black cloak, which was adorned with red clouds. His skin was a pale, shark-like blue, and his face was a tapestry of gill-like markings. A huge object, wrapped in white bandages, was strapped to his back. It seemed to hum in the humid air, a low, eager vibration that its wielder could feel in his teeth. Kisame Hoshigaki grinned, a gesture that showed off rows of needle-sharp teeth. He had been sent to observe the Nine Tails Jinchuriki, to gauge its power. What he had seen was so much more. This wasn't the chaotic, raging power of a tailed beast. This was controlled, elemental, divine. The sheer volume of chakra. No, it wasn't just chakra, it was something purer, denser, had made his beloved sword, Samahata, practically sing with hunger. Well, Kisame rumbled to himself, his voice like gravel grinding at the bottom of the sea. It seems the world still holds some surprises. He watched as the Anbu took Mizuki into custody and a medical team carefully placed Iruka on a stretcher. He watched the old Hokage speak to the boy, his words too distant to hear but his posture radiating caution and fear. The boy himself looked tired now, the immense power having receded, leaving only a small, lonely child in its wake. But Kisame had seen what lay beneath that surface. He had seen the abyss. With a final, hungry glance at the boy being escorted back towards the village lights, not as a hero, but as a problem to be managed, Kisame Hoshigaki melted into the shadows of the leaves. His mission had just changed. The Akatsuki didn't just want the Nine Tails. They would want the god that contained it. Naruto walked between two stone-faced Anbu, his gaze fixed on the ground. He could feel their fear. It rolled off them in waves. A scent as potent as their sweat and steel. The Hokage walked ahead of him, his back ramrod straight, the weight of 1,000 decisions pressing down on him. They didn't take him home. They didn't take him to the hospital. They led him deep into the base of the Hokage monument, to a sterile, windowless room with a single table and 2 chairs. It was an interrogation room. Here, Uzen dismissed the guards and sat down opposite Naruto. For a long time, he just stared, his old eyes filled with a conflict Naruto couldn't decipher. "Your mother," Hiruzen began, his voice raspy. "Kushina Uzumaki. She was from the land of whirlpools, a place where the sea was not just a body of water, but a thing to be respected. Worshipped, even." Naruto listened, his heart pounding. He knew nothing of his parents. It was the one question the Hokage had always refused to answer. "She had a unique chakra," Hiruzen continued, choosing his words with immense care. "Like you, an incredible vitality, a force of life. We all thought it was just a trait of her clan." He sighed, the sound echoing in the small room. "We were wrong. It was something more, something older." He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "Naruto, the power you displayed tonight, that was not the 9 tails. The seal the 4th Hokage placed on you is perfect. No chakra from the beast can escape. In fact, it was designed for the opposite purpose. It was designed to help contain you." Naruto's head snapped up. "Contain me, your own power, Naruto. It has always been immense, overflowing. Since the day you were born. The atmospheric pressure has dropped wherever you feel strong emotion. Small ponds have flooded. It has been a struggle to keep it hidden, to allow you some semblance of a normal life." Hiruzen's expression was pained. "A life I have clearly failed to give you." Naruto stared at his hands. The hands that had summoned an ocean. The hands that felt more comfortable in water than on land. The whispers of the villagers suddenly seemed so small, so insignificant in the face of this truth. His problem wasn't a demon sealed inside him. His problem was him. "What am I?" Naruto asked, the question raw and full of a lifetime of confusion. Hiruzen looked away, towards the cold stone wall, as if he could see through it, back through the years to a promise he had made a dying man. "You are the son of Kushina Uzumaki," he said, his voice barely audible. "And you are the son of a power as old as the tides. A god, some might have called him in ancient times." He finally met Naruto's gaze again. His eyes filled with a terrible certainty. "Tonight, you are no longer just a boy. You are a natural disaster walking in human form. And we, all of us, have to decide what to do with you." The silence that followed was heavier than any tsunami. Naruto looked at the old man, the leader of his village, and for the first time, he didn't see a grandfather figure. He saw a warden. He looked down at his own hands again, at the faint blue veins beneath the skin, and felt the distant, steady thrum of the great lake, calling to him. It felt less like a home now, and more like a kingdom, waiting for its king. A king who was currently a prisoner in his own village. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Weight of Water. The silence in his apartment was a living thing. Before, it had been a hollow, aching void that Naruto filled with noise for the simple sake of not feeling so alone. He would leave the faucet dripping, the radio on, anything to beat back the quiet. Now, the silence was different. It was full. He could hear the water humming in the pipes behind the walls, a low, constant song. He could feel the moisture in the air, the weight of the morning dew condensing on his windowpane. He could even sense the slow, steady pulse of the water table deep beneath Konoha's streets. It was all connected, a vast, circulatory system with him at its heart. He sat on the edge of his bed, not moving, just breathing. The events in the interrogation room with the 3rd Hokage felt like a dream, a fever dream that had burned away the world he knew and left this strange, clear reality in its place. He wasn't a demon. He was something else, something older. The revelation hadn't brought him peace, not yet. But it had brought him a profound, grounding sense of self. The restless, earning energy that had always plagued him, that had driven him to seek validation in shouted words and painted monuments, had settled. The ocean inside him was no longer a storm. It was a deep, calm tide, waiting. When he arrived at the academy for team placements, the change was palpable. He didn't burst through the door with a loud declaration. He walked in quietly, his footsteps making no sound, and took his usual seat by the window. He didn't slump in his chair or doodle on the desk. He sat with his back straight, his gaze fixed on the world outside, watching the patterns of condensation on the glass. The classroom, usually a cacophony of pre-genin chatter, fell into a stilted quiet. Heads turned, eyes widened. Shikamaru Nara, who had been expertly feigning sleep, cracked open an eye. Lit and studied Naruto with a lazy but sharp intelligence. He saw not the usual idiot in the bright orange jumpsuit, but a figure of stillness. The jumpsuit was the same, but the energy within it was alien. This was new. This was troublesome. Kiba Inuzuka, with Akamaru tucked inside his jacket, wrinkled his nose. The scent coming off Naruto was different. It had always been a chaotic mix of ozone and desperation. Now, it smelled of salt and distant storms, a clean, primal scent that made the small dog on his head whine softly. Sakura Haruno noticed it too. She had been preparing a scathing remark for his inevitable tardiness. But the words died in her throat. He was just there. Not looking for attention, not trying to impress her, not even looking at Sasuke. It was unnerving. When Iruka-sensei entered, he stopped in the doorway, his eyes immediately finding Naruto. He still wore a thick bandage over his shoulder and moved with a slight stiffness, a physical reminder of the night in the forest. He had visited Naruto in the Hokage's office the day before, after Naruto had been released. It had been an awkward, emotional meeting. Iruka had apologized again, not for being a bad teacher, but for being a blind one. Naruto had simply nodded, the chasm between his old life and his new one too vast to be bridged by words. Iruka cleared his throat, pushing aside the heavy memories. All right, everyone, settle down. Today, you all stop being students and start being genin of the Hidden Leaf. You will be placed in 3-man cells, with a Jonin sensei to guide you. This is where your true journey as shinobi begins. He began reading off the list of names. With each team announcement, a fresh wave of chatter would erupt, a mix of excitement and disappointment. Naruto remained still, his focus on the heavy gray clouds rolling in from the west. He could feel the moisture they carried, a massive reservoir of potential hanging over the village. Team 7, Iruka announced, his voice hesitating for a fraction of a second. Will be Naruto Uzumaki. Sakura's head sank to her desk in theatrical despair. Sakura Haruno, her head shot up, her eyes wide with horror. And Sasuke Uchiha, a beat of stunned silence. Then Sakura erupted in a cheer of pure, unadulterated joy, her despair forgotten. She had been placed on the same team as her beloved Sasuke-kun. The universe was good and just. Sasuke, for his part, showed no reaction, but his hands, resting on his desk, tightened into fists. He had seen the aftermath in the training grounds. He had heard the whispers among the Anbu who guarded the Uchiha compound. He knew something had happened with Naruto, something that had left a scar on the very landscape. To be teamed with the dead last was an insult. To be teamed with a walking anomaly was a complication he didn't need. Iruka finished the list, gave a heartfelt but slightly shaky speech about loyalty and the will of fire, and dismissed them for lunch, CTing them to meet their Jonin sensei in their designated classrooms afterward. As the room emptied, Naruto stood up. Sasuke rose at the same time, turning to face him. The air between them crackled. Sasuke's dark eyes were narrowed, searching, trying to peel back the layers of the idiot he thought he knew and find the source of the rumors. Don't get in my way, Dobi, Sasuke said, his voice low and cold. Naruto met his gaze. There was no anger in his blue eyes, no hurt, no boisterous retort. He simply looked at Sasuke, his expression unreadable, and then turned and walked out of the room without a word. The lack of reaction was more infuriating to Sasuke than any insult could have been. It was dismissal, as if he, the last of the Uchiha, wasn't even worth a response. Their Jonin sensei was late. Incredibly, infuriatingly late. Sakura had spent the first hour pacing and ranting, the second fawning over a stoic Sasuke, and the third alternating between the two. Sasuke sat at a desk, his fingers steepled in front of his face, radiating a palpable aura of irritation. Naruto sat on the floor by the window, cross-legged and perfectly still. He wasn't bored or annoyed. He was listening. He followed the path of a single drop of water as it condensed on the outside of the window, traced a meandering path down the glass, and joined a small puddle on the sill. He could feel the slig, HT shift in atmospheric pressure that signaled the coming rain. It was fascinating. He's not coming. Sakura finally wailed, throwing her hands up in the air. Every other team has already gone off on some adventure with their new sensei. And we're stuck here, with you, she finished, glaring at Naruto, as if his strange new placidity was somehow the cause of their misfortune. Just as her voice reached its peak, the door slid open. A tall man with a shock of silver hair that defied gravity stood in the doorway. His face was half hidden by a mask, and his headband was tilted to cover his left eye. He held up a hand in a lazy wave. "My first impression of you all," he said, his visible eye curving into a pleasant crescent. "Is that you're a bunch of idiots?" The oppressive weight of boredom was instantly replaced by a wave of indignation from Sakura and a deepening scowl from Sasuke. Naruto simply blinked, slowly, like a predator waking from a nap. Their new sensei, Kakashi Hatake, led them to the roof of the academy building. He told them to introduce themselves, their likes, dislikes, and dreams for the future. Sakura's was a rambling, Sasuke-focused mess. Sasuke's was a cold, terse declaration of his ambition to restore his clan and kill a certain man. When it was his turn, Naruto looked out over the village. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki," he said, his voice even and clear. "I like the quiet by the lake and the feeling of rain before it falls. I dislike people who lie to get what they want. And my dream," he paused, not for dramatic effect, but because he was genuinely considering it for the first time. The old dream of becoming Hokage so people would acknowledge him felt hollow now. It was a goal born of loneliness. He wasn't that person anymore. "My dream is to find my own path. And to be strong enough to protect the people who are precious to me." Kakashi's visible eye narrowed slightly. It wasn't the answer he had been expecting, based on the file Hiruzen had given him. The file spoke of a loudmouthed, attention-starved orphan. The boy in front of him was something else entirely. There was a weight to his words, a self-possessed gravity that was years beyond his age. Hiruzen's warning echoed in his mind. "He is not a weapon, Kakashi. He is a force of nature. Do not push him. Observe him, and pray you are equipped to guide him." "Good," Kakashi said, his cheerful facade back in place. "Varied personalities. This should be interesting. Meet me at Training Ground 7 tomorrow at 5 a.m. for a survival test. Oh, and I wouldn't recommend eating breakfast. You'll just throw it up." He vanished in a swirl of leaves, leaving three very different genin to contemplate his words. The next morning, Training Ground 7 was shrouded in a thick, wet mist. It clung to the trees, dripped from the leaves, and muffled all sound. It had rained heavily during the night, and the ground was soft and saturated. Sakura and Sasuke were already there, both looking tired and annoyed. Naruto had been there for an hour, sitting on one of the three wooden posts in the center of the clearing, feeling the immense amount of water that now permeated the entire area. The air was heavy, the earth was soft, and the nearby river was swollen and swift. It was perfect. Kakashi arrived, as expected, 3 hours late, holding a small clock. "Morning," he said brightly. "Right, let's get started." He placed the clock on the central post and pulled out 2 small silver bells. "Your task is simple. You have until noon to take these bells from me. Those who succeed will pass and officially become genin. Those who fail will be tied to one of these posts and will watch as I eat my lunch in front of you." He jingled the bells. "Since there are only 2 bells, at least, one of you is guaranteed to fail and be sent back to the academy. You'll have to come at me with the intent to kill if you want to get one." Sakura immediately protested the unfairness, while Sasuke's eyes gleamed with challenge. Naruto just watched Kakashi's hands, noting the way he held the bells, the subtle tension in his fingers. "When I say start," Kakashi said, tucking his favorite Ika book out of his pouch. "You can begin." He didn't even have time to open it. With a speed that shocked even Kakashi, Sasuke was on him, a kunai flashing in a deadly arc. Kakashi caught his wrist with one hand, twisting it, while blocking a kick with his other. They were a blur of motion. "I'm starting to like you guys," Kakashi said cheerfully, flipping Sasuke onto his back. "I haven't even said, start, yet." He looked at the other two. "Ready, start." Sakura and Naruto vanished into the trees. Sasuke, after a moment of glaring at Kakashi, did the same. The clearing was empty, save for the Jonin, who finally opened his book. For the next hour, it went exactly as Kakashi expected. Sakura fell for a simple genjutsu, an illusion of a wounded Sasuke that left her screaming and unconscious. Sasuke, for all his Uchiha talent, was still a genin. He attacked with fire style, impressive for his age, but Kakashi simply used a basic earth style wall to block it. He toyed with him, using his superior speed and experience to appear and disappear, leading Sasuke on a frustrating chase through the forest and eventually trapping him with a simple earth style headhunter jutsu, leaving ONL. Why Sasuke's enraged head sticking out of the ground. One down, one out, Kakashi sighed, marking their positions in his mind. Now, where is the other one? He had been keeping a subtle watch on Naruto, but the boy had simply disappeared. There were no tracks, no sound, not even a flicker of chakra that he could sense. It was as if he had been swallowed by the mist. Kakashi's guard went up. This was not the behavior of a dead last. This was the behavior of a hunter. He walked calmly towards the river, the sound of the rushing water a constant roar. The mist was thicker here, rising from the cold water to meet the humid air. He stood on the riverbank, his single eye scanning the dense foliage. That's when he felt it. A change in the air. The already high humidity was increasing. The air grew thick, heavy, like a physical blanket pressing down on him. Each breath felt heavier, wetter. The mist wasn't just a visual obstruction anymore, it felt like he was walking through a cloud. Water began to condense on every surface. On his clothes, his hair, his mask. He heard a sound, a soft, wet, squelching. He turned. Standing not 10 feet from him was Naruto. And beside him, another Naruto. And another. 3 of them, standing silently, watching him. They weren't the pale, pathetic illusions from the academy. They looked solid, real. Shadow clones, Kakashi said, his eye crinkling in a mock-impressed smile. Hiding that from the graduation exam. Clever. One of the Narutos took a step forward. It didn't speak. It simply raised an arm and charged. Kakashi met the attack easily, his hand slicing through the clone's chest. But there was no puff of smoke. The clone's body simply dissolved into water, splashing onto the ground, and then, impossibly, the puddle of water on the ground rose up and reformed the clone in a matter of seconds. Kakashi's eye widened. Water clones, but without hand signs. Another clone attacked from the side. He dispatched it with a kick, and the same thing happened. It burst into water and immediately reformed from the damp ground. A third came from behind, and as Kakashi spun to counter, he realized his mistake. His feet, which had been on solid ground, were now sinking. He looked down. The earth beneath him had turned to thick, clinging mud. Naruto, the real one, he presumed, who was still standing by the river, hadn't moved. He just watched, his expression calm and focused. He wasn't fighting a battle. He was conducting an orchestra. The clones were his instruments, the water his music. This is getting interesting, Kakashi muttered, pulling his feet from the mud with a grunt. He was a Jonin, one of the Leaf's finest. A genin's tricks weren't enough to stop him. He decided to end this quickly. His hand flashed through a series of seals. Electricity crackling around his palm. Lightning blade. He lunged forward, his hand a spear of pure lightning chakra, aimed at the real Naruto. The water clones moved to intercept, but he was too fast. He burst past them, his hand poised to strike, not to kill, but to shock him into submission and grab the bells. He never reached him. As he ran, the very air seemed to fight him. The immense humidity, charged by Naruto's chakra, caused his lightning blade to short out, the powerful jutsu fizzling into a shower of harmless sparks a few feet from its target. The sudden dissipation of energy threw him off balance. At the same moment, the swollen river beside them surged. A massive arm of water, a solid, powerful limb, erupted from the current and slammed into Kakashi's side. The force was incredible. It wasn't like being hit by a water dragon jutsu, which was just chakra shaped like water. This felt like being hit by a literal ton of water, a battering ram of pure, physical force. He was thrown through the air, skipping off the surface of the river before crashing into the opposite bank. He lay there for a moment, the wind knocked out of him, his mind racing. No hand signs, no shouted jutsu name. The boy had just looked at the river, and it had obeyed him. He got to his feet, coughing up water, every muscle aching. The 3 water clones were now on his side of the river, reforming from the water, blocking his path back. On the other side, Naruto hadn't moved an inch. The test, Naruto said, his voice carrying easily over the roar of the river, is about taking the bells. It's not about beating you. Kakashi looked down at his hip. The bells were still there. Of course they were. He hadn't been able to get within 10 feet of the boy. And you can't take them from me if you can't get to me. Naruto continued. And you can't get to me. Not when I have all of this. He gestured with one hand, not at the river, but at the entire training ground. At the mist, the mud, the puddles, the saturated leaves on the trees. The whole environment was his weapon. Kakashi stood up straight. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even frustrated. He was utterly, completely dumbfounded. He was Kakashi of the Sharingan, the copy ninja who had mastered 1,000 jutsu. And he was being held in a perfect, inescapable checkmate by a 12-year-old boy who had done nothing but manipulate the weather. Hirazen's words came back to him again. Do not push him. He finally understood. Pushing Naruto wasn't like pushing a ninja. It was like pushing the ocean. You couldn't win. You could only drown. A low growl came from the woods. Sasuke had finally managed to free himself from the headhunter jutsu, his face smeared with dirt and fury. He saw Kakashi on one side of the river, Naruto on the other, and the water clones standing guard. He didn't understand what had happened, but he understood the standoff. The noon bell chimed from the memorial stone, a distant, lonely sound that echoed in the mist. The clock on the post began to ring. Time was up. Naruto let out a soft breath. The heavy humidity lessened, the air becoming easier to breathe. The water clones dissolved with a final sigh, their forms melting into the river. The oppressive sense of being watched by the environment itself faded away. It was over. Kakashi used a shunshin to appear back in the clearing, beside the posts. He looked at the 3 genin who had gathered. Sakura, now conscious and looking confused. Sasuke, breathing heavily, his eyes burning with a frustrated fire. And Naruto, who looked as if he'd just been for a pleasant walk. They had all failed to get a bell. By the rules, they should all be sent back to the academy. You all fail, Kakashi said, his voice flat. But there was no bite to it. He walked over to the memorial stone, the one engraved with the names of Konoha's heroes. In the shinobi world, those who break the rules are scum, Kakashi said, his back to them. That's true, but those who abandon their comrades are worse than scum. He turned around, his visible eye no longer lazy, but sharp as a newly honed kunai. This test was designed to see if you could put the team before the mission. To see if you could work together to overcome an impossible obstacle. You, Sakura, abandoned Naruto and Sasuke to hunt for Sasuke on your own. You, Sasuke, dead your teammates were a liability and went off alone. And you, Naruto, he paused, looking at the blonde boy. You had the power to end this from the beginning. You could have overwhelmed me. But you didn't. You controlled the field, neutralized me as a threat, and waited. You understood that you alone couldn't take the bells while keeping your team safe. You forced a stalemate. You chose to protect your comrades over completing the mission objective. In your own way, you understood the lesson without ever being taught it. He looked at all 3 of them. The mission was to get the bells. But the goal was to become a team. None of you got a bell. But Naruto proved why a team is necessary. Because against a power like that, he gestured vaguely to the river, no one can stand alone. His eye crinkled. Team 7, passes. Your first mission starts tomorrow. Sakura cheered, then hugged a disgusted Sasuke. Sasuke just glared at Naruto, a million questions warring with his pride. This wasn't the Dobi. This was a rival, a monster of a completely different kind than he had ever imagined. Kakashi looked at Naruto, who was watching his new teammates with that same, unnerving calm. The 3rd Hokage had been wrong. His job wasn't to guide this boy. His job was to anchor him. To provide a human connection strong enough to keep that terrifying, oceanic power from washing the world away. And as he looked at the fractured, volatile trio that was now his team, he had a sinking feeling that he had just accepted the most difficult mission of his entire life. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Serpent in the Waves. The mission was a lie. Naruto knew it from the moment the third Hokage laid the scroll on his desk. It was AC rank, a simple escort mission for a bridge builder named Tsuna. It was the kind of mission genin teams cut their teeth on. Low risk, good experience, a chance to see the world outside the village walls. But Naruto saw the way Hiruzen's eyes lingered on him, the unspoken weight in his gaze. This wasn't a mission for Team 7. It was a test for him. A way to see how the natural disaster in human form would behave when let off its leash. The walk out of the village was a strange affair. Sakura was buzzing with the excitement of their first real mission, her chatter a bright, sharp counterpoint to the quiet hum of the world around them. Sasuke walked with a coiled tension, his hands in his pockets. His eyes scanning everything. His rivalry with Naruto had solidified from childish annoyance into a sharp, dangerous thing. He was constantly watching Naruto now, as if trying to solve a puzzle that infuriated him. Naruto, for his part, was quiet. The farther they got from the village, the more the world seemed to open up to him. He could feel the water in the leaves of the trees they passed. The morning dew evaporating in the sun, the slow, meandering path of a stream a half-mile to their left. It was a symphony of sensation he was only just beginning to understand. So, you're a ninja. You're all just a bunch of snot-nosed kids, Tsuna grumbled from behind them, his breath smelling of sake. Especially the short one with the stupid look on his face. Sakura bristled, ready to defend Naruto's honor, or at least the honor of her team. But Naruto didn't even turn around. He just kept walking. The old man's words were like stones thrown into the ocean. They made a small splash and were gone, swallowed by the sheer depth of Naruto's new reality. Kakashi, walking at the head of the formation, watched this exchange in the reflection of a puddle on the path. Naruto's silence was more telling than any outburst. It was the patience of a predator, or perhaps the indifference of a god. He still wasn't sure which was more unsettling. They had been walking for a few hours when Kakashi stopped. Up ahead, a large puddle shimmered on the road. It was strange, considering it hadn't rained in days. Sasuke noticed it too, his hand subtly moving towards his kunai pouch. Sakura was oblivious. Naruto felt it before he saw it. The water in the puddle was wrong. It was still, but it held a coiled tension, like a snake ready to strike. It felt oily, corrupted. Two figures erupted from the water, chains with wicked claws on the ends shooting towards Kakashi. First prize is the Jonin. One of them hissed. In an instant, they had Kakashi wrapped in their chains and, with a vicious tug, tore him to shreds. Sakura screamed, a high, piercing sound of pure terror. Tsuna stumbled back, his eyes wide. Sasuke moved, a blur of motion. He threw a shuriken that pinned the chain to a tree, then launched himself at the two enemy ninja with a kunai. He was fast, skilled, a prodigy in motion. But he was still just one boy against two chunin. Don't just stand there, Naruto. He yelled as one of the ninja broke free and charged towards Tsuna. Naruto hadn't moved. He was staring at the puddle. He could feel the unnatural chakra signature of the two ninja. But he could also feel the water they had used. It felt violated, tainted. A flicker of something cold and possessive moved through him. They had used his element. His domain. The CH. Unin raised his clawed gauntlet to strike Tsuna down. He never got the chance. Naruto raised a single hand. The puddle they had emerged from, and the water still dripping from their bodies, answered his call. It wasn't a violent summoning. The water simply detached itself from the ground and their clothes and formed into a dozen glistening, silver whips in the air. They struck with the sound of cracking ice. They didn't cut or slash. They wrapped around the two ninja, covering their limbs, their torsos, their mouths, silencing their shocked cries. The water, infused with Naruto's will, NTLY turned to a substance harder and colder than steel. The two assassins were frozen in place, living statues bound by the very element they had tried to use as a weapon. Sasuke skidded to a halt, his kunai inches from one of the ninjas' throats. He stared at the impossibly fast, impossibly silent takedown. Sakura's scream had died in her throat, replaced by a choked gasp. So, Kakashi said, stepping out from the trees. Completely unharmed. The shredded body had been a substitution log. You figured out it was a clone, huh, Sasuke? Good work. He then looked at the two frozen ninja, and then at Naruto, whose hand was still raised. But you didn't even let me have my cool entrance. Naruto lowered his hand. The icy bonds dissolved back into water, splashing onto the ground, and leaving the two Chunin sputtering and shivering uncontrollably. The cold had not just frozen them, it had leached their strength, leaving them weak and helpless. Kakashi tied them to a tree, his expression unreadable behind his mask. He had planned to use the attack as a lesson in teamwork and vigilance. Instead, he had just witnessed his most unpredictable student neutralize two Chunin-level threats without taking a single step. He turned to Tazuna. "This is no longer a C-rank mission," he said, his voice grim. "These are ninja from the village hidden in the mist. They're known for their persistence. You're being hunted by someone far more powerful than common thugs. You need to tell us the truth." Tazuna's story poured out of him on the small boat that carried them towards the land of waves. It was a tale of a corporate tyrant, a shipping magnate named Gato who had strangled the island nation with his monopoly, leaving its people impoverished and without hope. The bridge was their last chance, a symbol of freedom that would reconnect them to the mainland. Gato wanted Tazuna dead to keep that from happening. As they moved across the open water, a profound change came over Naruto. The oppressive humidity of the fire country forests gave way to the clean, salt spray of the sea. He leaned over the edge of the boat, trailing his fingers in the water. It felt alive. He could feel the vast, powerful currents moving beneath them, the schools of fish darting in the deep, the rhythmic pulse of the tide. It was like the lake back home, but magnified 1,000 times. The deep, calm certainty he had felt in the training ground returned, stronger than ever. This was his home, his true home. Sasuke watched him, a knot of frustration tightening in his chest. In the forest, he had felt superior. Fire was the Uchiha's element. But out here, on the water, he felt like a guest in a foreign land. And Naruto looked like he belonged. Their arrival was shrouded in a mist so thick it felt like a living entity. The land of waves was a place of muted colors, of gray water and dark, dripping pines. The air was heavy with the scent of salt and decay. The oppression here wasn't just economic. It was atmospheric. They had been walking along a narrow coastal path for less than an hour when Kakashi called a halt. "Down!" he yelled, pushing Tazuna and Sakura to the ground. A massive blade, a zanbato so large it looked like it had been forged for a giant, cartwheeled through the air, embedding itself in a tree trunk with a thunderous thwomp. A figure stood on the hilt. A man wrapped in bandages like a mummy, wearing the familiar headband of a mist ninja. Except it wasn't Zabuza Momochi. The figure was tall and impossibly thin, its limbs long and jointed like an insect's. It wore a loose-fitting gray robe, and its face was completely hidden by bandages, save for two large, black, multifaceted eyes that glittered with a cold, alien intelligence. It cocked its head, the movement jerky and unnatural. "The copy ninja, Kakashi Hatake," it said, its voice a dry, rasping hiss, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. "And the Uchiha survivor. My master will be pleased with such fine specimens." Its gaze then fell on Naruto, and a low, chittering sound came from behind its bandages. "But you are the prize. Lord Orochimaru sends his regards." Kakashi's blood ran cold. Orochimaru, one of the legendary Sannin, a monster who had defected from Konoha years ago, a twisted scientist obsessed with forbidden jutsu and immortality. If he was involved, this mission had just escalated from dangerous to potentially suicidal. "My purpose is simple," the creature hissed, leaping from the sword and landing silently on the path. "I am here to test the vessel. And, if it proves worthy, to collect it." It moved with a speed that was utterly inhuman. It didn't run. It flowed, its body contorting as it scuttled towards them. Sasuke reacted instantly, his hands a blur of signs. Fire style. Fireball jutsu. A massive ball of flame erupted from his mouth, roaring towards the creature. The creature didn't even try to dodge. It simply raised a long, thin arm. As the fireball hit it, the flames seemed to be drawn into its skin, absorbed without leaving so much as a scorch mark. The creature shuddered, and a faint red glow emanated from its chest. "Delicious," it rasped. Kakashi's Sharingan spun to life beneath his headband. He charged forward, his movements precise, aiming to engage in taijutsu. The creature met his attack, its limbs bending at impossible angles. Every time Kakashi landed a blow, he felt a sickening drain. His chakra, his very stamina, was being leached away with every point of contact. This experiment, was assigned to be the perfect anti-shinobi weapon. Sakura, overcoming her fear, threw a handful of kunai with explosive tags attached. The creature allowed them to hit, and the resulting explosion was simply eaten. The glow in its chest brightened. "Your techniques only make me stronger," it chittered, backhanding Kakashi and sending him tumbling into the trees. Now, for the main course. It turned its multifaceted eyes on Naruto. Its body unfolded, more limbs emerging from its back, and it surged forward, its intent clear. It wanted to touch him, to drain the immense power it sensed within him. Naruto stood his ground. He felt no fear, only a cold, territorial anger. This abomination of science, reeked of the same wrongness as the puddle the Chunin had used. It was an affront to the natural order. As the creature lunged, its clawed hand outstretched, Naruto didn't raise a wall of water or form a clone. He simply stood there and let it touch him. The creature's hand clamped onto his shoulder. A triumphant hiss escaped its bandages. It began to draw on Naruto's power, expecting the same rush of energy it had gotten from Sasuke and Kakashi. What it got was the ocean. It was not a flow of chakra it could absorb. It was a torrent, a cataclysm, a force of pure, untamed life as vast and deep as the sea itself. The creature's multifaceted eyes went wide with what could only be described as agony. Its body, designed to be a vessel for stolen energy, was now a dam holding back a flood it could never hope to contain. It tried to pull its hand away, but it couldn't. It was as if it were fused to him. Naruto's calm expression never changed, but his eyes began to glow with that soft, deep ocean luminescence. "You wanted my power?" Naruto asked, his voice quiet. "Take it." The creature began to scream. Its body swelled, bloating like a drowned corpse. Its skin split, not bleeding, but weeping a clear, viscous fluid. New, useless limbs sprouted from its torso, twitching and dying. Its form lost all cohesion, twisting and mutating into a cancerous mass of flesh and chitin. The faint red glow in its chest became a blinding white light, and with a final, wet, explosive pop, the creature burst. There was no blood, no gore. The monstrous form simply dissolved into a pile of gray, inert dust that smelled faintly of salt and ozone. It was gone, unmade, its Tolan life force utterly annihilated by the sheer volume of Naruto's own. Silence descended on the path. Sakura was retching into a bush. Sasuke was staring, his Uchiha pride completely shattered by the sight of a power so absolute, so alien, that it defied all logic. Kakashi, leaning against a tree for support, just looked at his student with a mixture of awe and profound terror. Miles away, beneath the earth in a laboratory lit by the cold glow of scientific equipment, a man with pale skin and golden eyes that were slit like a snake's watched the scene play out on the surface of a pool of water. A cruel, delighted smile spread across Orochimaru's face. "Incredible," he whispered, his voice a sibilant hiss. "It is not a Jinchuriki. It is a font, a gateway to the divine." The experiment, a priceless creation that had taken years to perfect, was a worthy sacrifice for this knowledge. He now knew the truth. The boy didn't just wield power. He was power, and Orochimaru would stop at nothing to make that power his own. They made it to Tsunamis' home, the weight of what they had just witnessed pressing down on them. Kakashi, drained and worried, sent a request for backup to the Hokage. They would guard the bridge builder, but he knew this was no longer about Gato. They were now a target for one of the most dangerous men in the world. A few days later, Team 8 arrived. Kurenai, Kiba, and Shino brought a sense of cautious relief. But it was Hinata Hyuga who felt the strangest pull. She had seen Naruto in the village, of course. The loudmouth, the outcast. But the boy who stood on Tsunamis' porch, staring out at the sea, was someone else entirely. There was a stillness to him, a depth that drew her in. That night, she couldn't sleep. She walked out of the small house and towards the sound of the waves. She found him there, standing at the edge of the surf, the water washing over his bare feet. He was looking out at the endless expanse of the ocean, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. She almost turned back, her natural shyness overwhelming her. But a deeper curiosity, a need to understand the feeling of immense, controlled power she had sensed from him since their arrival, pushed her forward. "Naruto-kun," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He turned. He didn't seem surprised to see her. He simply nodded a greeting. Are you all right?" she asked, feeling foolish. "I'm fine," he said, and she knew he was telling the truth. He seemed more than fine. He seemed complete. An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by the rhythmic crash of the waves. On an impulse she couldn't explain, Hinata did something she rarely did outside of combat. She activated her Byakugan. She wasn't trying to spy. She was trying to see. Her breath caught in her throat. She had seen countless chakra networks in her life. The intricate, blue pathways, the swirling nodes of the gates. Even Kakashi's, dense and powerful, followed the same basic template. Naruto's was not a network. It was a universe. There were no lines, no coils, no gates. Where his chakra system should have been, there was only a swirling, silver-blue vortex of impossible depth. It was a storm, a nebula, a maelstrom of pure, living energy that churned with the power of 1,000 tempests, all held in a state of perfect, impossible calm. It wasn't a part of him. It was him. She deactivated her dojutsu, her heart pounding, her mind reeling from the sheer scale of what she had just witnessed. What was that?" Naruto asked, noticing her shocked expression. "What did you see?" She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, the outcast, the dead last, the prankster, all fell away. She saw only the truth. "It's not chakra," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "It's an ocean, Naruto-kun. Endless and deep." She met his glowing blue eyes, her own wide with a terrifying, beautiful understanding. "And it's alive." For the second time in his life, Naruto felt the profound, earth-shattering sensation of being truly seen. The first had been Iruka, who had seen the lonely boy. But this was different. Hinata had looked past the boy, past the monster, past the god. And had seen the element itself. She had seen his soul. And in the quiet space between the crashing waves, a connection was forged, a silent understanding that would become an anchor in the storm to come. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Calm and the Storm. The return to Konoha was a silent one. The thick, salty air of the land of waves was replaced by the familiar scent of wood smoke and damp earth. But the transition did little to ease the tension that clung to Team 7 like a shroud. Sasuke walked with a rigid fury, the memory of his own powerlessness a fresh, gaping wound. Sakura, for the first time, kept her distance from him, her gaze flickering between her brooding teammate and the quiet blonde boy who had unmade a monster. Naruto himself seemed lost in his own world, his attention fixed on the heavy gray clouds that promised rain, his connection to the vast, open sea now a memory that made the village feel small and constricting. Kakashi's report the third Hokage was delivered in the sealed privacy of the Hokage's office. The room was dim, the only light coming from the rain-streaked window overlooking the village. Hiruzen sat behind his desk, his face grim, the smoke from his pipe curling towards the ceiling like a worried ghost. To his right, standing in the shadows where the light did not reach, was Danzo Shimura. His face was a mask of scar tissue, his right eye bandaged. His arm in a sling that did nothing to hide the palpable sense of coiled power he emanated. The creature was one of Orochimaru's experiments, Kakashi concluded, his voice flat and professional. Betraying none of the awe or terror he truly felt. It could absorb chakra. It neutralized Sasuke's fireball jutsu and my own techniques with ease. It then engaged Naruto. And Danzo's voice was a dry rustle of dead leaves. And Naruto allowed it to touch him, Kakashi said, meeting Hiruzen's tired eyes. The creature overloaded. It couldn't contain the sheer volume of his energy. It dissolved. There was nothing left. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken implications. Hiruzen took a long, slow draw from his pipe. Orochimaru knows, then. He knows the boy is more than a Jinchuriki. He knows, Kakashi confirmed. The boy is a threat, Danzo stated, stepping forward so that a sliver of gray light fell across his scarred face. His power is unstable, undocumented. He is a weapon without a proper wielder. To allow him to walk freely is a risk to this village of the highest order. He should be placed under the authority of my root, where he can be properly contained, trained, and utilized for the good of Konoha. He is not a weapon, Danzo, Hiruzen said, his voice sharp with a rare flash of anger. He is a 12-year-old boy. He is a tidal wave in human form. Danzo countered, his one visible eye glittering with a cold fire. Would you leave a loaded cannon in the hands of a child and call it responsible? I can give him purpose. I can give him control. Your idea of control is a cage, Hiruzen retorted, his gaze hardening. You would break him, not train him. He will remain under Kakashi's command. We will guide him, not shackle him. That is my final word on the matter. Danzo stared at Hiruzen for a long moment, the shadows seeming to deepen around him. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible bow. As you wish, Hokage-sama. He turned and walked from the room, his presence lingering like the chill of a tomb long after he was gone. Kakashi let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He won't let this go. I know, Hiruzen sighed, looking older and more tired than ever. Which is why we must tread carefully. The Chunin exams are approaching. All the genin teams from the allied nations will be here. It will be a political powder keg. And I am about to throw a lit match into it. He looked at Kakashi. I am recommending Team 7 for the exams. Kakashi's eye widened. Sir, with all due respect, they aren't ready. Their teamwork is a disaster. And Naruto. Naruto is the reason they must participate, Hiruzen interrupted. We cannot hide him. The world will soon know that something has changed in Konoha. It is better that they see his strength under our banner, in a controlled environment, than to hear of it in whispers and rumors spread by men like Orochimaru. Let them see a shinobi of the leaf. Not a monster in the shadows. It is a gamble, but it is one we must take. The first phase of the Chunin exams was a written test designed to test not knowledge, but the ability to gather information covertly. The room was filled with genin from every village, each one a bundle of nerves and bravado. Sasuke, with his Sharingan, began subtly copying the movements of a Chunin pea. Roctor, who was writing the answers for a plant in the crowd. Sakura, with her prodigious intellect, solved the complex problems on her own. Naruto sat at his desk and closed his eyes. The proctor, Ibiki Morino, had laid out the rules with sadistic glee. Anyone caught cheating 5 times would be disqualified along with their entire team. The air in the room was thick with tension and the subtle crackle of chakra. Naruto ignored it all. He didn't focus on the people. He focused on the room itself. He felt the humidity, the minute shifts in air pressure. He could sense the almost imperceptible vibrations of a pencil scratching on paper from 3 rows away. He could feel the condensation of a whispered breath as one ninja transmitted an answer to another. It was a sea of data, and he was floating in its currents. He didn't copy answers. He simply absorbed them from the environment, the information flowing to him as naturally as water finding its own level. He wrote down the correct answers one by one, his expression serene. His movements unhurried. When Ibiki called the 10th and final question, the one designed to break their spirits, Naruto didn't hesitate. He wasn't afraid of the unknown. He lived with it every day. His quiet confidence was a strange, calming anchor in the tense room, and when he was declared to have passed, along with his team, the look of utter disbelief on Sasuke's face was almost comical. The forest of death was a different beast entirely. The air was thick, wet, and alive. Anko Mitarashi, the proctor for the second exam, had laid out the rules with a wild, dangerous energy. Get a heaven and an earth scroll, make it to the tower in the center within 5 days, and try not to get eaten. As soon as they were through the gates, the oppressive atmosphere of the forest closed in. Sasuke was on high alert, his Sharingan active. We need a plan. We get a scroll, now, and head straight for the tower. Avoid all unnecessary contact. Someone's coming, Naruto said quietly. His head tilted as if listening to a distant sound. Big, fast, a gust of wind tore through the trees, and a genin team from the village hidden in the grass appeared before them. Or rather, one of them did. The other 2 were unconscious, slung over her shoulders. She was tall, with long, dark hair and an unnervingly long tongue that flickered out to taste the air. Her chakra felt wrong, ancient and impossibly vast. My, she hissed, her golden, slit-pupiled eyes fixing on them. A little Uchiha brat and, oh, this is a delightful surprise. Her gaze locked onto Naruto, and a look of ravenous hunger crossed her face. Who are you? Sasuke demanded, stepping in front of Naruto and Sakura, kunai at the ready. The grass nin giggled, a sound that made the skin crawl. Just a traveler, hoping for a bit of sport. Her neck elongated, stretching impossibly as her head snaked around Sasuke to get a better look at Naruto. I felt your power from a mile away, little vessel. So much more potent than the last one they sent for you. My master will be so very pleased. It was Orochimaru. Kakashi's warnings, the story of the Sannin, it all clicked into place in Sasuke's mind. This was him. The man Itachi had told him to seek when he had his eyes. This was the monster who had sent that creature after them in the land of waves. Before Sasuke could even react, Orochimaru moved. He was a blur, flowing past Sasuke as if he weren't there. He wasn't interested in the Uchiha, not yet. He was here for the main prize. He appeared before Naruto, his hand outstretched. 5 points of purple light glowing on his fingertips. Let's see what secrets that seal of yours is holding back. 5-pronged seal. He thrust his hand forward, aiming for the seal on Naruto's stomach. But he didn't get there. With a calm, fluid motion, Naruto caught his wrist. It wasn't a block born of speed or strength. It was simple, absolute interception. Orochimaru's eyes widened slightly. The boy's hand was cold. Impossibly cold. And it was strong. I don't think so, Naruto said, his voice dropping an octave, the sound of deep water in a cave. Orochimaru smiled, a wide, predatory grin. Feisty. I like that. He opened his mouth, and a new body, slick and covered in fluid, slithered out, leaving the empty husk of the grass nin to collapse. From his new mouth, a torrent of snakes, large and small, erupted. Swarming towards Naruto, Sakura screamed and fell back. Sasuke unleashed a massive fireball, incinerating the first wave of snakes, but more just kept coming. It was a tide of slithering death. Naruto didn't move, he just tightened his grip on Orochimaru's wrist. He looked at the sea of snakes, and then his gaze shifted towards the sound of rushing water, the river that cut through the center of the forest. He closed his eyes. He reached out, not with his hands, but with his will. The ground began to tremble. A low roar echoed through the forest, a sound that was not animal, but elemental. Orochimaru paused, his head cocked, a flicker of genuine curiosity in his reptilian eyes. The roaring grew louder, closer. Then, with a cataclysmic crash, the river burst its banks. It wasn't a flood, it was an attack. A colossal wave, dozens of feet high, surged through the trees, moving with a terrifying, intelligent purpose. It didn't wash over them. It rose up, forming a churning, liquid wall that encircled the clearing. From this wall, 2 massive serpents made of pure, rushing water took shape. They were larger than any of Orochimaru's summons, their eyes glowing with the same blue light as Naruto's, their roaring the sound of 1,000 waterfalls. One of the water serpents lunged, its massive jaws closing around hundreds of Orochimaru's snakes, crushing them into nothingness. The other coiled and struck, not at Orochimaru, but at the ground beneath him, turning the forest floor into a swirling vortex of mud and quicksand. Orochimaru laughed, a sound of pure, scientific ecstasy. Magnificent. To command the very arteries of the world. You are more than I could ever have hoped for. He dislocated his arm with a sickening pop, slipping free of Naruto's grasp. He summoned his largest snake, a purple behemoth that rose to challenge Naruto's water serpents. The battle was primal. The earth snake, a creature of scale and venom, clashed with the river snakes. Beings of pure force and pressure. Trees were shattered, the ground torn asunder. Sasuke and Sakura could only watch, huddled together, 2 insignificant mortals caught in a battle between gods. Naruto stood at the center of it all, his face a mask of concentration. This was different from the fight with Mizuki. This was harder. Orochimaru's chakra was old and vile, and his snake fought with a malicious cunning. Naruto could feel the strain. He was pushing himself, drawing on more power than he ever had before, and he could feel a darker, more violent aspect of it rising to the surface. The water turned dark. The currents grew more savage. He could crush this entire forest, drown it, and everything in it. The thought was terrifyingly tempting. He had to end it. He focused. And the two water serpents merged into one, a single, colossal beast that dwarfed Orochimaru's summon. It didn't just fight the snake, it engulfed it, the sheer pressure of the water suffocating it, crushing it. Until it dispersed in a puff of smoke. Orochimaru looked from his defeated summon to the boy who now stood alone, breathing heavily, the colossal water serpent dissolving back into the river behind him. The boy was shaken. He had seen the abyss within himself, and it had scared him. Perfect. You have passed my test, little vessel, Orochimaru hissed, his long neck extending towards a stunned Sasuke. But your teammate needs a gift. A reminder of the power he could have, if he only seeks it from the right source. He bit down on Sasuke's neck, leaving the 3-tomo curse mark. Sasuke screamed and collapsed. Orochimaru turned back to Naruto. Grow strong, little goatling. I will be back to claim what is mine when you are ripe. And with that, he melted into the forest floor, gone as if he were never there. The river receded, the forest fell silent, and Naruto collapsed to his knees, not from exhaustion, but from the emotional shock of the raw, destructive power he had just unleashed. He had protected his team. But he had nearly drowned the world to do it. They made it to the tower with minutes to spare, a broken and battered team. The encounter with Orochimaru had irrevocably changed them. Sasuke was unconscious, feverish from the curse mark. Sakura was traumatized but resolute, her fear forged into a new, protective instinct. And Naruto was silent, withdrawn. The memory of his own terrifying power a cold weight in his gut. It was there, in the main hall of the tower, that they saw Hinata. She rushed over, her face pale with worry. Her Byakugan had allowed her to see the massive, unnatural surge of power from miles away. She knew it was him. Naruto-kun, she said, her voice soft. Are you hurt? He shook his head, not meeting her eyes. She looked at him, her Byakugan inactive, but her own innate empathy seeing more than most could. She saw the fear in his posture, the self-doubt. I was worried, she said, choosing her words carefully. That power, it must be very heavy. Quote, he finally looked at her. She wasn't looking at him with fear, or awe, or even pity. She was looking at him with understanding. She wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid for him. In that moment, the raging storm inside him calmed, just for a second. He wasn't alone with this burden. Someone else saw it for what it was. The preliminary matches were held a day later. One by one, genin were paired off to fight, whittling down the numbers for the final round. Sasuke, still weak, managed a ferocious victory against one of Orochimaru's sound ninja. Sakura fought to a draw against Ino. Then, the screen flashed with the final pairing of the day. Naruto Uzumaki vs. Neji Hyuga. Neji, the prodigy of the Hyuga clan, stood calmly on one side of the arena. He looked at Naruto with cold, disdainful eyes. Then his gaze shifted to the balcony, where Hinata was standing. A failure like you against a genius like me, Neji said, his voice carrying in the silent arena. The outcome is predetermined. Just as it is Hinata-sama's fate to be weak, it is your fate to lose here. A person's destiny is set at the moment of their birth. You cannot fight it. Naruto looked at Hinata, saw the pained look on her face, then looked back at Neji. His old self would have yelled, would have made a grand speech about changing destiny. But he wasn't his old self. Let's just fight, Naruto said, his voice calm. The proctor began the match. Neji instantly fell into the gentle fist stance. I will show you the inescapable truth. Byakugan. The veins around his eyes bulged. Your fight is already over. He shot forward, a blur of motion. He was faster than Sasuke, more precise than Kakashi. He appeared before Naruto, his fingers aimed at the tenketsu points around Naruto's heart. 8 trigrams. 2 palms. 4 palms. 8 palms. 16 palms. His hands were a blur, striking Naruto's chest again and again. But something was wrong. There was no solid impact. Each time his fingers struck, it was like plunging them into a column of incredibly dense water. Naruto's body rippled, the force of the blows visibly dissipating across his skin, creating concentric circles like a stone dropped in a pond. Naruto didn't even grunt. He just stood there, taking it. Neji leapt back, his eyes wide with disbelief. What is this? Why can't I close your chakra points? His Byakugan showed him Naruto's internal system, but it was the same chaotic, swirling vortex Hinata had described. There were no points to close. It was like trying to stop a river by poking it with a stick. My turn, Naruto said quietly. He didn't move. He didn't make a hand sign. He just took a breath. And the entire arena changed. The air grew thick, heavy. Everyone present felt it. It became harder to breathe, as if a great weight were pressing down on their chests. Neji felt it most of all. His precise, graceful movements became sluggish, his robes clinging to him with moisture. Sweat beaded on his brow. But it wasn't from exertion. It was the humidity, which had skyrocketed to nearly 100% in a matter of seconds. What are you doing? Neji gasped, his stance faltering. Naruto didn't answer. He raised a hand. The moisture in the air, the water on the ground, the very sweat on Neji's skin, all of it became his weapon. An invisible pressure began to exert itself on Neji from all sides. It started as a gentle squeeze, then grew stronger. It was like being 1,000 feet beneath the ocean. Neji's Byakugan showed him a terrifying sight. The immense, formless chakra of his opponent was no longer contained within his body. It filled the entire arena, pressing in on him, a cage with no bars. Neji tried to move, to use his rotation, but his muscles wouldn't obey. The pressure was too great. He grunted, his knees buckling. He was the genius, the prodigy, the one favored by fate. And he was being brought to his knees by an opponent who hadn't thrown a single punch. With a final, agonizing groan, he collapsed onto the floor, unable to move, defeated not by a jutsu he could counter, but by the very air he was trying to breathe. The proctor, looking utterly baffled, checked on Neji and then raised his hand. Winner. Naruto Uzumaki. A stunned, dead silence filled the arena. The Jonin, even the Hokage stared at the boy standing calmly at the center of the arena. They had just witnessed a battle, but it had felt more like a terrifying demonstration. A demonstration of a power that didn't follow any of the known rules of their world. From the cage box, the cage, Orochimaru in disguise, licked his lips. In the shadows, Danzo's one visible eye shone with a cold, possessive light. And on the balcony, Hinata watched the boy she was beginning to understand. Her heart filled with a mixture of pride, awe, and a deep, chilling premonition of the storm that was to come. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Rising Tide. The month between the preliminaries and the final round of the Chunin exams passed in a strange, tense calm. The air over Konoha was thick with anticipation, a low hum of excitement and political maneuvering. That felt as tangible as the summer humidity. For Naruto, it was a period of quiet introspection. He spent his days with Kakashi, not learning new jutsu, but practicing control. They didn't work on flashy techniques. Instead, Kakashi would have him sit for hours by a stream, tasking him with separating the current into 2, then 4, then a dozen smaller streams without breaking the flow. It was agonizingly tedious work, a lesson in finesse over brute force. Naruto came to understand that his power wasn't a weapon to be swung, but an ocean to be guided. One did not command the tides, one learned their rhythm and moved with them. On the morning of the finals, he stood in the waiting area beneath the stadium, the roar of the crowd a distant, muffled thunder. He wasn't nervous. The fight ahead, a much-anticipated match against the Sand Village's volatile prodigy, Gaara of the Desert, felt less like a battle and more like a necessary confluence of events, two storms destined to meet. Naruto-kun. He turned. Hinata stood in the shadows of the corridor, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. She had been a quiet, constant presence over the past month, seeking him out not with the fawning admiration of other girls, but with a silent, steady understanding that was more comforting than any words of encouragement. I wanted to wish you good luck, she said, her cheeks tinged with pink. She held out a small object on her palm. It was a simple charm, a smooth, gray stone from the Naka River, polished by the current and tied with a simple blue thread. The water is always strongest when it is calm, she whispered, repeating a phrase she had once heard him mutter to himself during his training. He took the stone. It was cool and solid in his palm, a small piece of the world he understood. He met her gaze, and the roaring of the crowd, the pressure of the exam, the weight of his own power, all of it faded away for a single, quiet moment. "Thank you, Hinata," he said. The words were simple, but they carried a depth that made her blush deepen. He slipped the charm into his pocket, a small, solid anchor in the storm to come. When his name was called, he walked into the light of the arena. The roar of the crowd was deafening. Gaara was already there, standing on the opposite side of the field, his arms crossed, a gourd strapped to his back. The sand swirling his feet was a physical manifestation of the bloodlust pouring off him in waves. His teal eyes, rimmed with black, were utterly devoid of reason or sanity. They were the eyes of a creature that had never known love, only pain and fear. "I will prove my existence," Gaara rasped, his voice a dry, grating sound. "I will crush you. I will bathe in your blood. Mother demands it." The proctor signaled for the match to begin. Gaara didn't wait. A tidal wave of sand erupted from his gourd, surging across the arena floor towards Naruto, not to capture him, but to obliterate him under tons of crushing force. Naruto stood his ground. He held up a hand, and the very air in front of him seemed to liquefy. A wall of shimmering, clear water rose from the ground, meeting the wave of sand with a hiss. Water and sand churned together, turning Gaara's ultimate weapon into a churning torrent of useless, heavy mud that slumped to the ground. Gaara's eyes widened, his snarl deepening. More sand shot out, forming dozens of lances that flew at Naruto from all angles. Naruto simply took a step back, and the air around him grew heavy and wet. The sand lances, absorbing the sudden, immense humidity, grew heavy and slow, crumbling into damp piles before they could reach him. "Is that all?" Naruto asked, his voice calm. He felt a strange pity for the boy opposite him. He could feel the chaotic, raging power within Gaara, the tailed beast. Shukaku. It was like his own power, but twisted, broken. It was a storm without a direction, a sea raging against its own shores. Gaara screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage, and clutched his head. The sand began to swirl around him, faster and faster, forming a dense, protective sphere. He was losing control. It was then that it happened. A shower of white feathers began to drift down from the sky. A collective sigh went through the crowd as, section by section, they slumped forward, their heads lolling, falling into a deep, unnatural sleep. "The Genjutsu. Dispel," Kakashi yelled from the stands, his hand flashing through a seal. The illusion shattered for the Jonin and the more experienced shinobi, but the stadium was already in chaos. Figures in the uniforms of the Sound and Sand villages appeared on the rooftops, kunai flashing as the invasion of Konoha began. The sphere of sand around Gaara pulsed, and his siblings, Temari and Kankuro, appeared at his side. "It's too soon," Temari shouted, grabbing his arm. "We have to get you out of here to complete the transformation." They leapt towards the forest, dragging the groaning, unstable Gaara with them. From the cage box, a signal was given, and the fourth cage rose, holding a kunai to the throat of the third Hokage. A shimmering purple barrier erupted around the rooftop, trapping them. Sasuke, his eyes burning with a desperate need to test himself, to prove his own worth in the face of Naruto's monstrous power, leapt over the railing in pursuit of Gaara. "I'll handle him," he yelled. "Sasuke." "No," Kakashi shouted, but it was too late. He was already gone. He turned to his remaining students. "Naruto, Sakura, go after Sasuke. Protect him and stop the Sand Ninja. It's an A- rank mission. Go." Sakura nodded, her face pale but determined, and leapt after Sasuke. Naruto paused, his gaze fixed on the forest where Gaara had disappeared. He could feel it. The chaotic power of Shukaku was swelling, growing like a cancer on the landscape. This was more than just a fight. This was an imbalance. This was a force of nature running wild. He looked up at the barrier on the roof, saw the flashes of Orochimaru's battle with Hiruzen, and understood. The skirmishes in the stadium were a distraction. The true threat was the beast about to be unleashed. He followed, not running, but flowing through the trees, the moisture in the leaves seeming to pull him along. When he caught up, the scene was already a nightmare. Sasuke, his curse mark blazing across his skin, was locked in a desperate battle with Gaara, who was now partially transformed. One of his arms was a monstrous limb of sand, the Shukaku's markings covering half his body. Sasuke was fast, his Chidori screaming in his hand. But he was outmatched. Sakura was pinned to a tree by a stream of sand, unconscious. With a final, agonized roar, Gaara's transformation completed. A colossal creature of sand and cursed seals rose above the trees, a tanuki of apocalyptic proportions, its laughter the sound of grinding stone. Shukaku was free. The beast swiped a massive claw at Sasuke, who was too exhausted to dodge. But the blow never landed. A wall of solid, dark water, as hard and clear as obsidian, materialized in front of him, taking the full force of the blow without so much as a crack. Naruto landed softly on a branch between Shukaku and his teammates. He didn't even look at the beast. He looked at Sasuke, saw the shock and humiliation in his eyes, and then at the unconscious Sakura. He had failed. He had let his ambition put his team in mortal danger. "Get Sakura and get back," Naruto said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I can still fight," Sasuke protested, staggering to his feet. "No, you can't," Naruto said, his calm voice cutting through Sasuke's pride. "This isn't your fight." He finally turned to face the laughing, rampaging tailed beast. He could feel the earth trembling beneath its feet, the trees shattering in its wake. He closed his eyes and took a single, deep breath. He reached out, not just to the nearby stream, or the moisture in the air. He reached deeper. He touched the water table, the vast, hidden rivers flowing deep within the earth beneath the land of fire. He reached wider, pulling on the humidity for miles in every direction, drawing it towards him. He could feel the distant Naka River, the great lake on the western border, every pond, every puddle, every drop of dew. He felt the colossal reservoir of the sea, far to the east, and drew upon its memory, its sheer, indomitable essence. Shukaku paused in its rampage, its head cocked. It felt something, a shift in the world. The air grew impossibly heavy, the pressure dropping, as if the sky itself was about to collapse. The ground began to vibrate, not from its own footsteps, but from a deep, resonant hum that came from everywhere at once. Then it began. From the earth, water erupted. Not as a spring, but as a deluge, bursting from the ground in 1,000 places. The trees, the ground, the very air itself seemed to weep, the moisture condensing and flowing, forming a rising tide that swallowed the forest floor. From the horizon, beyond the village walls, a shadow grew. It was a line of impossible blue, rising higher and higher until it blotted out the sun. It wasn't a wave, it was a moving ocean. The tidal wave, hundreds of feet high, dwarfing the Hokage monument, surged towards them. But it did not crash. With a will that defied all physics, it flowed, it curved, it descended. It hollowed out the forest, forming a perfect, colossal crater with the rampaging Shukaku at its center. The wave became the walls of a temporary lake, a swirling vortex of water that penned the beast in. The battlefield was no longer a forest. It was a deep, dark, churning sea. Shukaku roared, a mix of fury and confusion, and swiped at the walls of its watery prison. But the water was not just water. It was a solid, yielding barrier, absorbing the force and reforming instantly. Naruto stood on the surface of the water, his feet not breaking the surface. And all around him, the lake began to churn as figures rose from its depths. 1, 10, 100, then 1,000. Water clones, each one a perfect, solid replica of himself, their eyes glowing with a soft blue light. They were an army born from the deluge. They moved as one. Half of the army surged towards Shukaku, their bodies forming a living, flowing barrier, crashing against the beast, not to harm it, but to slow it, to buffer its rage. The other half spread out. Some shot towards Sasuke, creating a platform of solid water to lift him and the tree Sakura was pinned to from the rising tide. Others flowed back towards the village, a massive, coordinated emergency response team, forming walls to divert the flooding away from residential areas, their limbs stretching to pull trapped and injured shinobi from the chaos of the invasion. Naruto wasn't just fighting a battle, he was managing a natural disaster of his own creation. From his vantage point on the water, he looked at Shukaku, trapped and raging. Containing it wasn't enough. The beast was a wound in the world, and it had to be closed. He reached out with his power, past the sand, past the chaotic chakra, and touched the very essence of the creature. He could feel the water that was bound within its sand and chakra form. It was a minuscule amount, but it was there. And it was enough. He began to pull. Shukaku stopped roaring. It shuddered, a low, agonized groan escaping its throat. It felt a pressure from within, a slow, inexorable crushing force. The water that gave its sand form cohesion was being turned against it, a rebellion on a molecular level. It was an agony it had never known, an attack it could not defend against. Naruto felt it all. He felt the beast's pain, its confusion, its millennia of lonely rage. To wield such absolute power over another living being, to be the source of such torment, it made him feel like a monster. For a terrifying second, he felt a kinship with the villagers who had feared him, with the cold certainty in Danzo's eye. Was this his destiny? To be a cage, a warden, a force that ended storms by becoming a greater storm? He pushed the thought aside. He would not be a monster. He would be a surgeon. He focused the pressure, a final, crushing squeeze. With a deafening roar of pain, the great sand body of Shukaku imploded, crumbling into a mountain of wet, heavy sand that fell into the lake. Atop the newly formed island, the small, unconscious form of Gaara lay, the cursed seals receding from his skin. The invasion was broken. The sound and sand ninja, seeing their ultimate weapon defeated by a literal act of God, lost their nerve and began to retreat. The leaf shinobi stood on the rooftops, staring in stunned, terrified silence at the new geography of their home. A great lake now sat where a forest had been, and at its center floated the boy who had saved them all. On the cage rooftop, the barrier fell. Hiruzen Sarutobi lay dying, a sword through his chest, but a faint smile on his lips. He had sealed Orochimaru's arms, crippling him. His old student had fled. With his last ounce of strength, the third Hokage looked out over his village. He saw the great lake, the calm water. The boy standing at its center, alone, still point in the changed world. His last breath escaped in a whispered, awe-filled phrase. The sea has come to Konoha. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Salt of the Earth. It was raining on the day of the third Hokage's funeral. A cold, persistent drizzle that clung to the black mourning clothes of the villagers and traced sorrowful paths down the carved faces of the Hokage monument. The sky over Konoha wept, a vast, gray sheet of sorrow that seemed to emanate directly from the small figure standing apart from the crowd. Naruto stood under the shade of a large oak tree. The polished stone Hinata had given him cool and heavy in his pocket. He did not cry. The ocean inside him was still, its depths cold and silent. He felt a profound, hollow ache where Hiruzen Sarutobi had been. The old man had been his warden, his observer, a figure of distant authority. But he had also been the one who would visit with a bowl of ramen, the one whose eyes held a flicker of something like grandfatherly affection, however strained it might have been. He was a constant, and now he was gone. The villagers gave him a wide berth. They did not whisper insults or glare with hatred anymore. The fear was still there, but it was different now. It was the awe-struck, primal fear one had for a dormant volcano or the deep, dark places of the sea. They had seen what he could do. He had saved them, yes, but a force that could create a lake within the village walls was a force that could just as easily drown them. He was no longer the village outcast. He was the village's god, and they were terrified of his wrath. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, an old woman stumbled near him, dropping a white lily she had meant to place on the memorial. Before it could touch the muddy ground, a tendril of water, no thicker than a thread, lifted from a puddle, caught the stem with impossible gentleness, and offered it back to her. The woman froze, her eyes wide with terror. She snatched the flower from the watery grip as if it were a snake, bowed hastily without meeting his eyes, and scurried away. Naruto let the tendril dissolve, his hand falling back to his side. He had only tried to help. He looked up and saw Kakashi watching him from across the memorial, his single eye filled with a weary concern. Beside him, Sasuke stood rigid, his gaze fixed on Naruto. A burning intensity in his dark eyes. The Uchiha's pride was a shattered thing, replaced by a desperate, hungry obsession. He no longer looked at Naruto as a rival to be surpassed, but as a living definition of a power he had to obtain, at any cost. The power vacuum left by Hiruzen's death threw the village's leadership into chaos. In the emergency council meetings that followed, the two elders, Homura and Kaharu, were indecisive, their adherence to tradition useless in the face of such unprecedented circumstances. It was in this chaos that Danzo Shimura thrived. The village is vulnerable, he stated, his voice a calm, chilling anchor in the storm of panic debate. His arm was still in a sling, a stark reminder of his age, but his presence commanded the room. Orochimaru has revealed our weakness. We possess an asset of immeasurable power, one we have failed to properly control or understand. The Jinchuriki, he used the term with deliberate irony, has become a strategic liability. He cannot be allowed to remain a variable. What are you suggesting, Danzo? Kaharu asked, her voice thin. I am suggesting we secure our asset, Danzo replied, his one visible eye sweeping across the council. He must be brought under doctrine. He must be given purpose. My root is equipped for such a task. This is not a punishment. It is a necessary measure to ensure the continued security of the hidden leaf. His logic was cold, sharp, and to a council gripped by fear, it was dangerously persuasive. 2 days later, Naruto was in his apartment, watching the rain streak down the windowpane, when there was a knock at the door. It was an Anbu, their porcelain cat mask hiding all expression. Uzumaki Naruto, the operative said, their voice filtered and toneless. The council requires your presence for a debriefing on the events of the invasion. You are to come with me. Naruto felt a flicker of unease. This felt too formal, too cold. But it was an order from the village council. He nodded and followed the Anbu through the rain-slicked streets, not towards the Hokage Tower, but towards a nondescript administrative building near the edge of the village. They descended flight after flight of sterile stone stairs, going deeper into the earth than he had ever been. The air grew cold and smelled of dust and ozone. They arrived in a large, circular chamber. The walls, floor, and ceiling were covered in a breathtakingly complex array of fuinjutsu seals, intricate black lines that pulsed with a faint, contained energy. In the center of the room stood Danzo Shimura, flanked by a dozen root Anbu, their animal masks blank and soulless. The door slammed shut behind him, the sound echoing with a grim finality. Thank you for coming, Naruto-kun, Danzo said, his voice deceptively pleasant. This isn't a debriefing, Naruto stated, his hand instinctively going to the smooth stone in his pocket. He could feel the lack of water in this place. The air was dry, recycled. The stone walls had been leached of all moisture. He was cut off from his element. No, it is not, Danzo said, his expression unyielding. It is a necessary precaution. Your power is a threat. Uncontrolled, it is a danger to the very village you saved. Here, we will contain it. We will study it, and in time, we will teach you how to wield it as a true, unwavering shield for Konoha. This is not a prison. It is your new training ground. You're going to lock me away, Naruto said, his voice dangerously quiet. We are going to give you purpose, Danzo corrected him. He gave a slight nod. The root ninja moved as one, their hands flashing through a single, synchronized hand seal. The fuinjutsu arrays on the walls blazed to life, glowing with a fierce, violet light. Chains of pure chakra erupted from the lines, shooting towards Naruto, wrapping around his limbs and torso, pinning him in the center of the room. He struggled, but the chains were designed to suppress chakra, to drain and bind any shinobi. But Naruto's power wasn't shinobi chakra. He felt the seals, the foreign energy trying to invade his system, to cage the ocean within. And the ocean reacted. It reacted not with malice, but with the implacable, absolute force of a natural law being violated. His divine essence, the very lifeblood of the sea that flowed in his veins, treated the mortal fuinjutsu as a poison. A foreign body to be violently expelled. A low hum began to emanate from Naruto's body. The violet glow of the seals flickered. The root ninja grunted, pouring more of their own chakra into the array. Trying to strengthen the cage. Hold him, Danzo commanded, his eye wide. The hum grew into a roar. The violet seals began to turn a sickly, pale color, the intricate lines cracking like heated glass. The chains of chakra didn't just break, they dissolved, turning to harmless motes of light. Naruto's eyes began to glow, the blue light so intense it illuminated the entire chamber. Then, with a sound like the world cracking in two, the seals shattered. But there was no explosion. It was an inversion. The immense energy of the sealing jutsu, with nowhere to go, was consumed by Naruto's power. A shockwave of pure, colorless force erupted from him. The root ninja were thrown against the walls, their masks cracking, their chakra systems instantly shorted out, leaving them unconscious but alive. Danzo was shielded by a hastily erected wood-style barrier, but even he was forced back, his face a mask of shocked disbelief. The chamber began to flood. But the water wasn't coming from pipes. It was erupting from Naruto himself, a torrent of pure, primal energy manifesting as physical water. It poured from him in an endless stream, flooding the room, the pressure building until the stone walls groaned and cracked. With a final, explosive burst of pressure, the ceiling gave way, and Naruto was propelled upwards on a geyser of his own creation, bursting through the administrative building above in a shower of stone and water. He landed in the muddy street, soaked and disoriented, alarms blaring across the village. He was standing in the ruins of a state building, surrounded by unconscious Root Anbu. He hadn't meant for any of it to happen. His power had reacted on its own, a cornered animal lashing out to protect itself. He looked at the shocked faces of the villagers, at the Anbu appearing on the rooftops. He was no longer their savior. He was their escaped monster. Panic set in. He ran. He fled through the back alleys of the village, his only thought to get away. To get to the forest, to the lake, to somewhere he could think. He heard the shouts of his name, the orders to capture him. He saw Kakashi land on a rooftop ahead, his Sharingan revealed. His expression conflicted and pained. Naruto couldn't face him. He couldn't explain. He ducked into another alley, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He burst out onto a deserted training ground near the village wall and skidded to a halt. His path was blocked. Two figures stood in the downpour, their presence a stark black stain against the gray world. They wore black cloaks adorned with red clouds. One was the massive, shark-skinned man from that night in the forest. The other was slighter, his face impassive, his dark eyes holding a deep, ancient sadness. But it was the Sharingan in those eyes, a Tomo pattern Naruto had only ever seen on Sasuke and Kakashi, that made his blood run cold. It seems the leaf is having some internal troubles, Kisame Hoshigaki grinned, his sharp teeth glistening in the rain. Samahata, his bandaged sword, twitched on his back, humming with anticipation. Saves us the trouble of a stealthy infiltration. Naruto Uzumaki, the other figure said, his voice a low, even monotone. Itachi Uchiha, but that is not your true name, is it? He took a step forward, the rain seeming to avoid him. We have come for the son of the sea god. Naruto was cornered. His own village was hunting him from behind, and the world's most dangerous criminals stood before him. The fear and confusion in his gut curdled into a cold, defiant rage. The water on the ground began to tremble, rising in small vortices around his feet. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, his voice tight. Don't you? Itachi replied, his gaze unwavering. Your power is not of this world. It is an imbalance. The Akatsuki exists to restore balance. We will relieve you of your burden. Kisame laughed. Enough talk, Itachi-san. Let me see if he bleeds like a god or a fish. He drew Samahata, the bandages falling away to reveal a sword covered in living, writhing scales. But Itachi held up a hand. This one is different. He focused his gaze on Naruto, and his Sharingan morphed into a three-bladed pinwheel. Mangekyo Sharingan. A point of blackness appeared in his vision. Amaterasu. Black flames erupted on Naruto's left arm. The pain was immediate, a fire that burned hotter than anything imaginable, a fire that felt like it was consuming not just his flesh, but his very soul. He screamed, stumbling back, clutching his arm. He tried to douse it with the water at his feet, but the flames were impervious, consuming the water itself with a hungry hiss. This was it, the inextinguishable fire, the ultimate jutsu. But as the flames burned, the ocean within him surged. It was not a conscious act. It was a primal, immune response. From the pores of his skin, a clear, shimmering fluid began to seep, a liquid that looked like water but felt like life itself. It met the edge of the black flames. There was no sizzle, no steam, no sound at all. Where the divine water touched the Amaterasu, the black flames simply vanished. They were not extinguished. They were unmade, their very existence erased by a power that was their fundamental, absolute opposite. Itachi's impassive mask finally broke. His eyes widened in genuine, profound shock. His Amaterasu, The flames from hell that could burn for 7 days and 7 nights had been neutralized in seconds. Naruto, breathing heavily, looked at his arm. The fire was gone. His sleeve was burned away. But his skin, though red and angry, was already beginning to heal. Kisami's grin was gone, replaced by a look of wild, predatory ecstasy. Incredible. What a magnificent power. The confrontation was about to escalate into a battle that would scar the very earth when a new voice boomed from above. Now, kids. Let's not destroy the whole village before I've had a chance to do my research. A shadow fell over them. With a ground-shaking thud, a toad the size of a house dropped from the sky, landing squarely between Naruto and the 2 Akatsuki members. Atop its head, a tall man with a wild mane of white hair and red lines painted on his face struck a dramatic pose. Jiraiya, one of the legendary Sannin, the Toad Sage of Mount Myoboku, had arrived. Itachi Uchiha, Jiraiya said, his goofy tone gone, replaced by the hard edge of a seasoned warrior. It's been a long time. I can't let you take this boy. He's much too important to my plot. Itachi stared at Jiraiya, then at Naruto, then back. His mind, a tool of genius-level calculation, assessed the new situation. A Sannin, plus a boy who could neutralize Amaterasu. The odds of a successful capture had just dropped to near 0. We will withdraw, Itachi said to Kisame, his voice flat. For now. Kisame looked disappointed but nodded. With a final, hungry look at Naruto, the 2 Akatsuki members flickered and vanished in a swirl of crows and water. Jiraiya hopped down from his toad's head, dismissing the great beast in a puff of smoke. He turned to Naruto, who was staring at him, utterly bewildered. Rain plastering his blonde hair to his forehead. The Sannin's expression was a mixture of pity, curiosity, and a grim sense of responsibility. Well, kid, Jiraiya said, scratching the back of his head. You've had one hell of a day. He looked back in the direction of the blaring alarms. Looks like you're not exactly popular in the village right now. He sighed. It seems you and I need to have a long talk. And probably take a little trip. Naruto looked from the legendary ninja to the village that was now hunting him. His world turned completely upside down in the span of an hour. He was a fugitive, a monster, a god, a target. He was lost. And for the first time, a hand was being offered to him, not to cage him, but to guide him out of the storm. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Uncharted Depths. The rain followed them out of the land of fire. It was a constant companion, a whispering gray curtain that blurred the line between the sky and the muddy road. For 2 days, they walked in a silence that was deeper than the lack of words. Jiraiya, for all his boisterous energy, seemed to understand that the boy beside him was not the same one he had been tasked to watch from afar. The loudmouthed, attention-starved orphan was gone, washed away in the flood of his own power and the betrayal of his own village. In his place was a quiet, watchful presence, a stillness that was somehow more intimidating than any outburst. They stopped in a small, nameless town on the border of the land of hot water, a place that smelled of sulfur and damp rot. Jiraiya led them to a dingy tavern where the patrons kept their heads down and their hands on their mugs. He ordered 2 bowls of ramen and a bottle of cheap sake, and for a long time, they just sat, the steam from the noodles fogging the air between them. They'll be looking for you, Jiraiya said finally, not looking at Naruto but at the condensation on his sake cup. Danzo won't take what happened lying down. He'll paint you as a flight risk. A traitor who attacked his own Anbu and fled. He'll make it official. Naruto pushed a piece of pork around his bowl with his chopsticks. He tried to put me in a cage. That's what Danzo does. Jiraiya sighed, taking a long drink. He sees a nail that sticks up, and his only instinct is to hammer it down. He doesn't understand that you're not a nail. You're the whole damn ocean. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. And he's not the only one who wants you. That group, the Akatsuki, Itachi Uchiha and Kisame Hoshigaki. They're collecting the tailed beasts. We thought that was all they were after. But they knew what you were. They called you the son of the sea god. They're not just hunting monsters, kid. They're hunting gods. Naruto finally looked up, his blue eyes clear and cold as glacial ice. What am I, Jiraiya? The question hung in the air, simple and profound. Jiraiya met his gaze, the usual twinkle in his eyes gone, replaced by a deep, somber gravity. He owed the boy the truth. He owed it to his student, and to his student's wife. "You're the son of two of the bravest people I ever knew," Jiraiya said softly. "Your father was Minato Namikaze, the fourth Hokage." Naruto's chopsticks clattered into his bowl. The fourth Hokage. The hero of the village. The man who had sealed the 9 tails inside him. The man whose face was carved on the mountain, a constant, silent reminder of a heroism Naruto had always felt was impossibly out of reach. "And your mother," Jiraiya continued, his voice thick with memory, "was Kushina Uzumaki. A Jonin from the land of whirlpools. She was vibrant, fierce. The only thing that could match the storm in her heart was the love she had for you." A single, hot tear traced a path through the grim on Naruto's cheek before he wiped it away with the back of his hand. His parents. They had names. They had faces in his mind now, however blurry. They weren't an abstract absence anymore. They were real. "But that doesn't explain this," Naruto said, gesturing vaguely to himself. "No," Jiraiya admitted, "it doesn't. I don't have all the answers, kid. Kushina was special. Her clan was legendary, for their vitality and their sealing jutsu. They lived on an island, surrounded by the sea. They respected it, had a connection to it. But what you have, it's something else. Something older." He finished his sake in one gulp. "There's only one place we might find those answers. We're going to the place your mother was born. We're going to Uzushiogakure." The journey to the coast was a training ground. Jiraiya did not teach him ninjutsu. He didn't need it. Instead, he taught him philosophy. He taught him to listen. They stood by a raging river, swollen with a week of rain, the water churning and white. "Your power responds to your will," Jiraiya explained, shouting over the roar of the current. "But your will is driven by emotion. Rage, fear, desperation. That's why you summon tidal waves and floods. It's a sledgehammer, kid. Effective, but messy. You need to learn to use a scalpel." He picked up a small, black stone, no bigger than his thumb. "There's a stone that looks just like this one at the bottom of that river. I want you to bring it to me." Naruto stared at him. "You want me to dive in there? I'll be torn apart." "I don't want you to touch the water," Jiraiya said with a grin. "I want you to touch the stone. With your senses. Your power isn't just in your body. It's in every drop of water in the world. You're connected to it. Stop trying to command it, and start trying to listen to what it's telling you." For a full day, Naruto sat on the riverbank, his eyes closed. He tried to project his senses, to force his will into the river, but it was like shouting into a hurricane. The chaos of the current was too much. Frustrated and exhausted, he was ready to give up. He remembered Hinata's words. "The water is always strongest when it is calm." He stopped trying to shout. He stopped trying to command. He just listened. He let the roar of the river wash over him, and slowly, he began to hear the nuances within it. He felt the way the water flowed around a large boulder. The subtle shift in the current as it passed over a smooth, sandy patch, the drag of a sunken log. He extended his senses, not as an invader, but as a part of the river itself. He became the current, and there, nestled in a small hollow behind a larger rock, he felt it. A small, smooth, cold spot in the chaos. The stone. He opened his eyes and pointed. "It's there." He reached out his hand, and a single, delicate tendril of water rose from the raging river, immune to the chaotic current around it. It flowed down, a gentle, searching limb, wrapped itself around the small black stone, and brought it to the surface, depositing it in his palm. Jiraiya stared, his mouth agape. He had expected it to take the boy a week, maybe more. He had done it in a day. He looked at Naruto, who was staring at the stone in his hand with a look of quiet wonder, and a shiver ran down the Sannin's spine. The boy wasn't just learning control. He was waking up. The sea around the land of whirlpools was a death trap. A churning maelstrom of whirlpools and razor-sharp rocks that had shredded countless ships over the centuries. It was the nation's greatest defense, and the reason its ruins had remained largely undisturbed. Their small chartered fishing boat bobbed nervously at the edge of the turbulent water. "This is as far as I go," the grizzled captain said, his face pale. "That's the devil's maw. No ship goes in. No ship comes out." Jiraiya looked at the raging vortexes. "He's right. Not even my toads could navigate that. Naruto stood at the bow of the boat, his eyes closed. The salt spray clinging to his hair. He didn't feel the danger. He felt a greeting. A boisterous, chaotic, joyful welcome. This wasn't the devil's maw. This was his father's house. I can get us through, Naruto said quietly. He stretched out his hands. He didn't try to stop the whirlpools. He didn't try to calm the sea. He simply asked for passage. He reached out with his will, a gentle but firm request. A son asking his father to open the door. And the sea obeyed. With a great, groaning sound, the massive whirlpools began to shift. The churning water did not calm, but a clear, relatively placid channel began to open through the heart of the maelstrom. It was a liquid canyon, with towering walls of swirling water on either side. The captain and Jiraiya stared, their faces a mask of utter disbelief. Well, I'll be damned, Jiraiya whispered. Naruto guided the boat through the path he had created, the vessel creaking and groaning as the immense forces of the sea churned just feet from its hull. As they passed through, the ruins of Uzushiogakure came into view. It was a city of broken, white towers, crusted with salt and draped in seaweed, a stark skeleton against the gray sky. It was a place of ghosts and echoes. They landed on a crumbling dock and stepped into the silence of the dead city. As Naruto's feet touched the ancient stone, he felt a low thrum of energy, a deep, resonant hum that came from beneath the island itself. It was a familiar feeling, the same sense of belonging he felt by the lake, but amplified 1,000-fold. Your mother told me stories, Jiraiya said, his voice soft in the quiet air, of a hidden place, a sanctum, a place where the Uzumaki clan paid their respects to the sea, their protector. Naruto closed his eyes and followed the hum. It led them through the ruined city to a cliff overlooking the ocean. There was nothing there but a sheer drop to the churning waves below. A dead end, Jiraiya wondered. Naruto shook his head. It's not a dead end. It's a door. He looked down. The hum was strongest here, coming from deep beneath the waves. He walked to the edge of the cliff, and without hesitation, he leapt. Kid, Jiraiya yelled, rushing to the edge, expecting to see him dashed on the rocks. But Naruto did not fall. He simply stopped, hovering a few feet from the cliff face, held aloft by a column of water that had shot up to meet him. He descended slowly, the water his elevator, taking him down into the waves. Jiraiya, after a moment of stunned hesitation, took a deep breath and dived in after him. The water was clear and unnaturally warm. About 100 feet down, nestled in a massive underwater cavern, was a structure that took Jiraiya's breath away. It was a temple, carved not from the rock, but seemingly from a single massive piece of pearlescent coral. It glowed with a soft, internal light, and a great bubble of air surrounded it, holding the sea at bay. Naruto created a small bubble for Jiraiya, and they swam through the shimmering barrier into the breathable air of the sanctum. The air inside was ancient, still, and silent. The walls of the temple were covered in intricate carvings, a story told in mother of pearl. They started at the beginning. The first mural depicted the ancient Uzumaki, their red hair vibrant even in the carved stone, making offerings to a turbulent sea. The next showed a figure rising from the waves. It was humanoid, but taller, more majestic, its form seemingly woven from light and water, a great trident held in its hand. It was not a man. It was a concept given form. The god of the sea. As they walked deeper, the story unfolded. The sea god had become the patron and protector of the Uzumaki. And then, a new figure appeared in the carvings. A young woman with long, flowing hair. Her face set in a look of fierce determination. Even in stone, her resemblance to Naruto was unmistakable. Kushina Uzumaki. The murals showed her not as a supplicant, but as an equal. She met with the sea god, she challenged him, she laughed with him. A bond was formed, a love between a mortal priestess and a divine being. One carving, breathtaking in its intimacy, showed the two of them together. His hand of light resting on her swollen belly. She was with child. My God, Jiraiya breathed, his voice thick with emotion. He had loved Kushina, in his own way. He had seen her as a surrogate daughter. But he had never known the truth. Not all of it. The final carvings were a prophecy. The sea god was shown departing, pointing across the sea towards the land of fire. The child was to be born there. A bridge between two worlds. Then, a scene of chaos. A great, nine-tailed fox of pure malice attacking a village of leaves. And a blonde-haired man, the fourth Hokage. His face a mask of love and sacrifice, holding a newborn baby. He wasn't just sealing the fox. The carving was explicit. He was performing a complex, layered seal, using the fox's immense chakra as a lock, an anchor. To bind the child's overflowing divine power to his mortal body, lest it consume him from within. The nine tails was never his curse. It was his salvation. It was the cage that had kept the ocean from overflowing its banks. Naruto stood before the final mural, his hand tracing the face of his mother. He looked at the carving of the sea god, a being of immense, impersonal power, and then at the face of Minato. A man filled with desperate, personal love. He finally understood everything. The villagers' fear was not of the fox, but of the leaking divinity they could not comprehend. His isolation, his strange powers, the third Hokage's weary caution, Danzo's desire to cage him, Orochimaru's obsession, the Akatsuki's hunt, it all fell into place. He was not a demon. He was not a Jinchuriki. He was not even just a boy. He was Naruto Uzumaki, son of Kushina, the priestess of the whirlpools. He was the son of Minato Namikaze, the fourth Hokage of the Hidden Leaf. And he was the son of the raging, endless, indomitable sea. A profound sense of peace washed over him. The storm that had raged within him his entire life, the desperate need for acknowledgement, the gnawing loneliness. It all finally quieted. The weight of his power was still there, immense and terrifying. But it was no longer a burden. It was a legacy. The water within the sanctum began to swirl gently around him. The pearlescent walls glowing brighter, reacting to his emotional catharsis. Jiraiya placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. Your father, Minato, he told me before you were born, He said he was entrusting you with a power that could either save the world or drown it. He asked me to be your godfather. To guide you, to help you choose the right path. He looked at the boy, who was no longer a boy, but something more. It seems our real training starts now. Naruto nodded, his eyes clear and resolute. He looked back at the carving of his parents, a mortal hero and a divine priestess. And then turned to face the entrance of the temple. He had found his past. Now, it was time to face his future. A future where gods and monsters were real, and he was walking the tide line between them. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The God in the Machine. Time on the road with Jiraiya moved to a different rhythm. The frantic, panicked energy of Naruto's escape from Konoha had slowly given way to the steady, patient pace of their journey. Weeks turned into months. The world expanded, and with it, Naruto's understanding of the ocean within him. He learned that control was not about suppression, but about release. It was the art of knowing when to be a tidal wave and when to be the gentle morning mist. Under Jiraiya's philosophical tutelage, he practiced not just moving water, but listening to it. Becoming one with its endless, cycling nature. The raw, emotional outbursts that had once defined his power were tempered, honed into a tool of breathtaking precision. They were in a all-port town in the land of Tea when Jiraiya's network finally delivered. A coded message, carried by a toad no bigger than a fist, brought news that was both a lead and a death sentence. A Megakure, Jiraiya said, his face grim as he burned the scroll. The village hidden in the rain. My sources say the leader of the Akatsuki, a man calling himself Pan, has made it his fortress. He's revered as a god there. The village has been sealed off from the outside world for years, a nation unto itself. They stood on a cliff overlooking the gray, churning sea. The salt spray was a familiar comfort to Naruto. The Akatsuki leader, Naruto said. The one Itachi answers to. The very same, Jiraiya affirmed. But this is a trap, Naruto. The entire village is perpetually drenched in a rain that is infused with his chakra. He can sense anyone who enters, anyone who isn't one of his followers. It's the perfect surveillance network. Naruto closed his eyes, feeling the moisture on the wind. The distant promise of a storm front far out at sea. A village made of water, he murmured. A faint smile touched his lips. He thinks it's his network. Let's go. Jiraiya looked at the boy, at the quiet, unshakable confidence that had replaced his old bravado, and found himself smiling back. All right, kid, but we do this my way. I go in first, gather intel, see what makes this God, tick. You stay back, you observe. You are the last resort. The nuclear option. Understood. Naruto nodded. He understood perfectly. He was no longer a panicked child. He was a force, held in reserve. Megakure was a city of weeping steel. Towers of metal and concrete stretched towards a perpetually gray sky, their surfaces slick with a rain that never ceased. Water flowed in 1,000 pipes and aqueducts, a mechanical circulatory system that mimicked the veins of a living thing. The entire city felt like a monument to sorrow. Jiraiya infiltrated with the ease of a master spy, disappearing into the city's underbelly. Naruto, cloaked and hooded, found a high point on the city's outer wall and sat down, cross-legged, in the downpour. He closed his eyes and reached out, not with his chakra in the traditional sense, but with his very essence. He touched a single raindrop on his cheek. Through it, he felt the one next to it, and the one next to that. In seconds, his consciousness expanded, flowing through the very medium pain used for surveillance. He became the rain. He saw the whole of Megakure, not as a city of steel, but as a map of water. He saw the people huddled in their homes, their Chakra signatures, a mixture of fear and reverent worship. He felt the 6 distinct, powerful signatures of the Akatsuki leader, moving through the city like disembodied ghosts. And high above it all, in the tallest, most grotesque tower, he felt the true source. A single, frail life, tethered to the machine of the city, pumping out power like a diseased heart. He saw the trap, he saw the battlefield, and he waited for his master's signal. The signal came not as a flare or a message, but as a sudden, violent disruption in the city's flow. Jiraiya had been discovered. Naruto felt his master's powerful, familiar chakra clash with 2 others, one that felt like paper, and one of the 6 avatars of pain. Jiraiya was cornered, fighting for his life against impossible odds. It was time. Naruto took a breath, and the rain over Megakure stopped. For the first time in years, the ceaseless drumming on the metal roofs fell silent. The oppressive weight of the chakra-infused rain vanished. The people of the city looked up from their windows, their faces filled with stunned disbelief, as the eternal gray clouds began to part. The silence was absolute, a strategic move that was more jarring than any explosion. Naruto had just blinded his enemy and seized control of the entire board. On a wide, rain-slicked plaza high above the city, the 6 avatars of pain converged. They moved in perfect sync, their orange hair and pierced faces a terrifying vision of inhuman unity. They looked up at the clearing sky, then turned as one to face the lone figure who had just arrived. You have a power that does not belong to the mortal world, the central figure, the Diva Path, said. Its voice was cold, devoid of emotion, yet it carried the weight of absolute conviction. You are an accident of nature, a force of chaos in a world that desperately needs order. Your existence brings only destruction. You talk about order, Naruto replied, his voice calm and clear, echoing in the sudden silence. But all I see is a cage. You keep these people in fear and call it peace. Pain is the only path to true peace, the Diva Path stated. Through shared suffering, humanity will finally learn to put down its swords. I will use the tailed beasts to create a weapon so terrible it will burn the fear of war into the hearts of every nation. It is a necessary evil, a divine judgment. You're no god, Naruto said, the water in the pipes and aqueducts around them beginning to hum with a low, resonant power. You're just a man who was hurt so badly he decided to hurt the whole world back. I am pain, the Diva Path declared, its 5 companions falling into attack formation. And I will teach you the meaning of the word. The battle began. The Preta Path, a gaunt figure designed to absorb ninjutsu, rushed forward. Its hands outstretched, expecting a wave of chakra. Naruto gave it none. He simply raised a hand, and from a nearby cistern, a jet of water shot out, no thicker than a needle but moving at supersonic speed. It was not a jutsu. It was physics, applied with divine force. The Preta Path, not sensing a chakra signature, tried to block it. The high-pressure jet sliced through its arm as if it were paper. Before it could react, another jet struck its chest, and the avatar simply disintegrated, its body unable to withstand the pure, kinetic force. The animal path slapped its palms on the ground, summoning a monstrous, multi-headed dog that multiplied with every blow it took. Naruto didn't fight it. He stomped his foot, and the plaza beneath the great beast turned to liquid mud. The creature, for all its size and ferocity, sank into a deep, inescapable mire, its struggles only pulling it deeper until it was swallowed by the earth. The remaining 4 paths attacked as one. The Asura path, its body a canvas of hidden rockets and blades, unleashed a barrage of fire. The human path shot forward, its hand glowing with the power to rip out a soul. Naruto met the onslaught with a quiet exhale. The water in the air, the puddles on the ground, the very moisture of the city rose to meet him, forming a swirling, defensive sphere. The rockets sizzled and died against the liquid shield. The human path's hand plunged into the sphere and found nothing to grip, its technique useless against an opponent without a truly solid form. From within the sphere, a dozen whips of water, hardened to the consistency of diamond and honed to a razor's edge, shot out. They moved with a surgeon's precision, not crushing the Asura path, but systematically severing its mechanical joints. Dismantling the war machine piece by piece until it collapsed into a heap of scrap metal. Another tendril, moving with impossible speed, wrapped around the human path's head. There was no crushing force, just a sudden, intense burst of cold. The water manipulated the bioelectricity in the avatar's brain, instantly short-circuiting its nervous system. It dropped, twitching and inert. The Naraka path, the king of hell that could revive the others, was suddenly isolated. Before it could act, the very ground it stood on gave way, plunging it into a newly formed sinkhole that immediately filled with a thick, viscous sludge. Trapping it, only the Diva path remained. Impressive, it said, its voice still flat, betraying no emotion as it gazed upon the wreckage of its other selves. But, you have only been fighting the hands of God. Now you face His will. It rose into the air, its arms outstretched. Feel pain. Contemplate pain. Accept pain. No pain. The air itself distorted around it. Almighty push. A wave of pure, invisible gravitational force erupted outwards, powerful enough to level a village. But Naruto was ready. He had been gathering the water from every pipe, every canal, every reservoir in a megacre. High above the plaza, a colossal sphere of water, a miniature ocean, had formed, held in place by his will alone. The almighty push slammed into the watery buffer. The impact was silent but absolute. The sphere of water did not shatter. It absorbed, dispersed, and negated the wave of force. The only result was an immense, citywide cloud of steam as the energy was converted into heat. The Diva path's eyes widened for the first time. It had used the power to repel all things, and its opponent had created an immovable object. My turn, Naruto said. He did not attack. He simply let the colossal sphere of water collapse. It fell not as a flood, but as a gentle, cleansing rain, a baptism for the city that had forgotten the sun. Some of it, however, he directed with purpose. The water flowed over the injured shinobi Jiraiya had been fighting, its touch soothing, its divine energy knitting wounds and restoring strength. Jiraiya, leaning heavily against a wall, looked up at the falling rain, and then at Naruto, his face a mask of awe and pride. The Diva path, its most powerful technique negated, tried a different tactic. Universal pull. It thrust out its hand, trying to draw Naruto towards it. But Naruto stood his ground, anchored not to the metal plaza, but to the entire water system of the city beneath him. He was as immovable as the city itself. Seeing its powers failing, the Diva path resorted to its final, most devastating technique. A small, black sphere formed in its hands and floated into the sky. Shibaku Tensei. The sphere began to pull. The wreckage of the plaza, the steel beams of the towers, the very ground itself was torn loose, drawn up towards the black hole to form a great, planetary satellite of death. Naruto looked up at the growing moon of debris. He could fight it, he could try to push back, but that would only level the city he was trying to protect. He remembered Jiraiya's lesson by the river. Don't command, listen. Don't fight the current, become it. He didn't fight the gravity. He gave it what it wanted. With a final act of will, he sent the remaining water he controlled, a body of water the size of a small lake, surging upwards. The Chibaku Tensei, which was pulling rock and steel, was suddenly inundated with a far heavier, denser material. The water flowed into every crack and crevice of the satellite, filling it. Weighing it down, its immense mass overwhelming the gravitational core. The black sphere sputtered, unable to sustain the impossible weight. With a groan that sounded like the sky tearing, the satellite imploded, collapsing in on itself. The result was not an explosion, but a single, torrential downpour. The city's own water returned to it, cleansed and pure. The Diva Path fell from the sky, its power expended, and crashed to the plaza floor, inert. The battle was over. Naruto stood in the rain, his own rain, and traced the last, faint flicker of chakra back to its source. He walked to the tallest tower, the paper fluttering around him parting as if in deference, and found him. The real pain, Nagato, was a ghost. A man so emaciated he was barely more than a skeleton. His back pierced with the black rods that transmitted his power, his hair a shocking, Uzumaki red. The paper-wielding woman, Konan, stood before him, a final, desperate line of defense. Naruto stopped. He didn't raise a hand to fight. He looked at the ruined figure in the strange, mechanical throne, and he saw not a god, but a casualty. He saw a distant kinsman, another orphan of a forgotten clan, who had been twisted by the world's hatred. Our master, Jiraiya, he believed in a world where people could truly understand each other, Naruto said, his voice quiet. He never gave up on that dream. You did. Nagato looked at him, his ancient, ringed eyes, the Rinnegan, filled with a deep, fathomless pain. That dream is an impossibility. A childish fantasy. No, Naruto said, stepping past a yielding Konan. It's just hard. What you did, bringing peace through terror, that's not strength. It's fear. It's the easy way out. He looked at Nagato's red hair, a mirror of his mother's. My parents, they entrusted me with a power to protect, not to rule. You had a power to change the world, and you chose to break it. I won't. Tears streamed down Nagato's hollow cheeks. In Naruto's words, he heard the echo of their shared master, of his own lost ideals. He saw a different path, one he had long thought buried. Perhaps, you are right, Nagato whispered. He formed one last, trembling hand seal. Konan, take him, to a place of sun. He closed his eyes. Art of Rinne rebirth. A gentle, green light emanated from him. Outside, the rain falling on the city began to glow. Uri shinobi Pain had killed during Jiraiya's infiltration. Every civilian caught in the crossfire, their life force was returned. It was his final act. An act of creation, not destruction. An act of atonement. The light faded, and Nagato, the god of Omegakure, slumped forward, his life expired. Konan looked at Naruto, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and a new, fragile hope. He believed in you, she said. Omegakure, the hidden rain, will believe in you now, too. Naruto walked to the great window and looked out. The rain had stopped. For the first time in decades, a ray of genuine sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a golden light on the weeping steel city. He hadn't just defeated an enemy. He had healed a nation. He had shown a fallen god the path back to humanity. The rest of the Akatsuki was still out there, a storm waiting to break, but here, in this one small corner of the world, the tide had finally turned. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The War of the Heavens. News of the events in Omegakure spread not like a wildfire, but like a tremor from the deep ocean, a silent, powerful shift in the world's balance that every nation felt in its bones. A Sannin had been defeated. The god of the hidden rain was dead, and the Akatsuki, the world's most feared terrorist organization, had a new, declared ally in Konoha's most volatile asset, Naruto Uzumaki. The political landscape of the shinobi world, already fractured, was threatening to shatter completely. The emergency summit of the Five Cage was convened in the neutral land of iron, a place of snow and steel. The atmosphere was colder than the mountain winds that howled outside. The Reikage, was a thundercloud of contained fury. The Tsuchikage, Onoki, floated with the weary cynicism of a man who had seen too much. The Mizukage, Meiterumi, hid a sharp, calculating mind behind a pleasant smile. The new Cage, Gaara, was a still, silent presence, his gaze unreadable. Representing Konoha, to the shock and disgust of the other cage, was Danzo Shimura, having leveraged the chaos and fear following the invasion to seize the title of acting Hokage. He sat at the table like a vulture, his very presence poisoning the air. The issue is not the Akatsuki, Danzo began, his voice a dry rasp that commanded the room. They are a symptom. The disease is the proliferation of unchecked power. Specifically, the power of the boy, Naruto Uzumaki. He laid a thick file on the table. He has defied the will of the Konoha Council, assaulted Root Anbu, and fled the village. He has single-handedly toppled the government of a sovereign nation and installed a new regime loyal only to him. He is not a shinobi. He is a rogue state in human form. I propose a joint operation to classify him as a global threat, to be captured or eliminated for the stability of all our nations. The Raikage slammed a massive fist on the table, cracking the wood. The boy who harbors the 9 tails and defeated an Akatsuki leader. You want us to hunt the man who did a job we have all failed to do. His power is a greater threat than any tailed beast, Danzo insisted. It is an apocalypse in waiting. Before the debate could escalate, the doors to the chamber slid open. 2 figures entered. The first was Konan, the angel of a Megakure, her face a pale, determined mask. The second was Jiraiya, his presence filling the room with the weight of a living legend. Forgive the intrusion, Jiraiya said, his usual joviality gone, replaced by a steel that none of the cage had seen before. But if you are going to discuss the fate of my godson, I felt it was only proper he have representation. The Hidden Rain is no longer a vassal of the Akatsuki, Konan announced, her voice ringing with a newfound strength. RV. Illich has suffered under the illusion of a false god for too long. We have found a new path. A Megakure hereby declares its unwavering allegiance to Naruto Uzumaki. The chamber erupted. An alliance with a person, not a village. It was unprecedented. It was absurd. It was in this moment of chaos that a new voice, playful and distorted, echoed from the center of the room. A swirling vortex of space appeared, and from it stepped Toby. His single orange mask a cyclopean eye staring at the most powerful leaders in the world. My, what a lively party, he chirped. It saves me the trouble of hunting you all down individually. The cage and their bodyguards sprang into defensive stances. Akatsuki. The Raikage roared. Oh, that old thing. Toby said with a wave of his hand. The plan has changed. The collection of the tailed beasts was simply, Phase 1. He turned his masked gaze towards Danzo. You were right about one thing, old man. This is all about Naruto Uzumaki. But you are a fool if you think you can control him. Or that I would ever let you. His voice dropped, the playful tone vanishing, replaced by a deep, resonant authority that was centuries old. I am declaring the beginning of the 4th Great Ninja War. But this is not a war for land or power. It is a holy war. I will have Naruto Uzumaki. His divine essence is the key, the final catalyst I need to revive the progenitor of all chakra. He spread his arms wide. I will bring back the goddess, Kagaya Otsutsuki, and with her power, cast a true and lasting peace upon this broken world. He looked at Gaara. The power of the tailed beasts is a fragment of her might. He looked at the Raikage. The power of your clans is a pale imitation. He looked at Danzo. And the power of the Uchiha and Senju, the very foundation of your village, is a diluted echo of her divine bloodline. He was not just declaring war. He was rewriting their history, their entire understanding of the world. He was framing the conflict not as shinobi against shinobi, but as mortals against the coming of a true god. You are all invited to participate, Toby said, his form beginning to swirl. Give me Naruto Uzumaki, or watch your world be offered up as a sacrifice to welcome its rightful owner. He vanished, leaving behind a stunned, terrified silence. The debate was over. Danzo's motion was forgotten. They were no longer discussing a rogue shinobi. They were facing an existential threat. Gaara was the first to speak, his voice cutting through the tension. My friend, Naruto Uzumaki, saved me. He saved my village. I will not hand him over to be a sacrifice. Suna will stand with him. This is madness, Onoki grumbled, but there was a flicker of fear in his old eyes. It is our only choice, Mei agreed. This man, Toby, has just made Naruto the most important person in the world. After a long, tense moment, the Raikage slammed his fist on the table again, this time in resolution. Very well, we will form an allied shinobi force. But if this boy is to be our centerpiece, I will not see him hidden away like some fragile princess. If he is the god this lunatic claims he is, then he will stand at the front. A consensus was reached, born not of trust, but of shared terror. They would fight, and Naruto would not be their weapon. He would be their leader. The war began on a vast, barren plain in the land of frost. A desolate expanse of rock and dust under a pale, uncaring sky. Tens of thousands of shinobi from all 5 great nations stood together, a sea of unfamiliar headbands and uneasy alliances. Opposite them, an army that defied life itself. An endless horde of chalk-white Zetsu soldiers, their forms shifting and mutable. And among them, the reanimated legends of the past, brought back by Edo Tensei, past Cage, fallen heroes. And the slain members of the Akatsuki, their eyes marked with the black sclera of servitude, their faces twisted masks of their former glory. Tobi stood on a high cliff overlooking his army of the dead, the reanimated Jinchuriki at his side, all controlled by his will. The stage was set for a battle of attrition, a meat grinder that would choke the land with blood and bodies. Then, Naruto arrived. He walked onto the battlefield alone, Jiraiya having taken a command position with the other Cage. He wore no special armor, carried no weapon. He simply walked to the center of the vast, empty space between the 2 armies and stopped. He closed his eyes, placed a hand on the dry, cracked earth, and the world changed. A tremor ran through the ground, not a violent earthquake, but a deep, resonant thrum. From the spot where his hand rested, a spring of pure, clear water bubbled up. The spring became a pool, the pool a pond, the pond a lake. The water did not flood erratically. It spread with a deliberate, intelligent purpose, filling the great basin of the battlefield. The dry, dusty plain vanished, replaced by a vast, calm, inland sea that stretched from one army to the other. The water shimmering under the pale sun. The allied shinobi forces stared in stunned silence from their cliffside positions. The Zetsu army, built for land warfare, faltered, their advance turning into a confused, floundering mess. Naruto stood on the surface of the water, the new king of his newly created kingdom. He raised a hand, and from the depths of the sea he had made, his own army rose. Thousands upon thousands of water clones, no longer just copies, but fully realized soldiers. Some were infantry, armed with spears and shields of hardened water. Own rode upon great steeds woven from the currents. Great serpents and beasts of living water patrolled the depths. It was the army of Poseidon, summoned from nothing. Engage, Naruto said, his voice quiet. Yet it carried across the entire sea. His army of water surged forward, a silent, disciplined, flowing tide. They crashed into the chaotic ranks of the Zetsu. The reanimated shinobi unleashed their powerful jutsu, fireballs, lightning strikes, earth walls, but their attacks were swallowed by the endless, yielding, and overwhelming mass of water soldiers, who simply reformed the moment they were dispersed. Naruto himself did not move from the center. He was the nexus, the command center, his mind connected to every single clone, directing the flow of the battle on 1,000 fronts simultaneously. He was not a general directing a war. He was the war. From the enemy lines, a figure shot forward, leaping across the heads of the Zetsu, his dark cloak billowing. He landed on the water's surface opposite Naruto, his feet held aloft by a massive, skeletal ribcage of purple chakra. Sasuke Uchiha had arrived. His eyes were no longer the simple Sharingan. They were the intricate, terrifying pattern of the eternal Mangekyo. He looked at the impossible scene before him, at Naruto commanding an ocean and an army of water, and he felt not jealousy, but confirmation. "This is the power I've been seeking," Sasuke said, his voice cold and clear. "The power to change the world. You use it to protect, Naruto. A noble but foolish goal. You save people, but you don't change the broken system that makes them need saving in the first place." The skeletal ribcage grew, flesh and armor forming over it until the colossal form of a perfect Susanoo stood on the water, a god of ethereal purple energy. In one hand, it held a great bow. "I will create a true, lasting peace," Sasuke declared, his voice booming from within the avatar. "A world united under my control. A revolution that will burn away the failures of the past. I will take on all the world's hatred myself. Your power will be the foundation of my new world." "You're talking about tyranny, Sasuke," Naruto replied, the water around him beginning to swirl, rising into great vortexes. "You can't force people to be safe. You have to trust them to be strong. Trust is what leads to betrayal and war." Sasuke roared, his Susanoo drawing its bow. An arrow of pure black fire, Amaterasu, knocked itself. I will show you the meaning of absolute power. He fired. The arrow of an extinguishable flame streaked across the sea. Naruto didn't counter with water. He raised a hand, and a colossal wall of solid, hyper-compressed salt, drawn from the very memory of the sea, rose to intercept it. The Amaterasu struck the wall and was smothered, its flames unable to burn the pure, lifeless crystal. High above, the sky began to darken as Sasuke prepared his ultimate technique. Lightning crackled, gathering from the atmosphere, drawn by his chakra. This ends now, Naruto. Disappear with the thunder. Kirin, a dragon of pure, natural lightning descended from the heavens, a strike of absolute, inescapable speed. As it fell, Naruto looked up, and the entire inland sea rose with him. It formed a great, domed shield over the battlefield, a sky of water to meet the sky of lightning. The Kirin struck. The impact was silent and blinding. The lightning did not pierce the dome. It was conducted, dispersed across the surface of the water in a brilliant, beautiful, and utterly harmless web of energy that covered the entire battlefield. When the light faded, Naruto stood, unharmed. Is that it, Sasuke? Is that the limit of your new world? Sasuke, within his Susanoo, was panting, his chakra nearly spent. He had used his two most powerful techniques, and his opponent had neutralized them as if they were children's toys. With a roar of pure frustration, he charged, his Susanoo drawing a great chakra blade. Naruto met the charge. The sea around him rose into two colossal, swirling arms of water, each one the size of a mountain. One arm parried the Susanoo's blade, the other slammed into its side, the impact sending shockwaves that rocked the entire battlefield. It was a battle of gods, a maelstrom of purple chakra and endless blue water, of ambition against trust, of control against freedom. Their clash was so immense, so powerful, that it created a localized storm at the center of the battlefield, a cyclone of black fire, lightning, and raging water. From the cliffs, the Allied forces and Toba's army could only watch in terror and awe. This was not a shinobi battle. This was mythology made real. As the two demigods battered each other towards exhaustion, a new figure appeared on the battlefield, landing softly between them. The storm of their making seeming to part for him. He had long, black hair, crimson armor, and eyes that held the ancient, rippling pattern of the Rinnegan. He looked at the Susanoo, at the ocean, at the two boys bleeding and panting before him, and he smiled. It was a smile of utter, supreme confidence. Madara Uchiha, brought back to life not as a puppet, but in his full, living glory, had arrived. He ignored Toby, dismissed him with a wave of his hand. He made a single seal, and the husk of the 10 tails, the Gedo statue, was summoned. With a power that dwarfed even Naruto's, he sealed the beast within himself. A wave of unbelievable power washed over the world. Madara floated into the air, his hair turning white, a staff of black chakra in his hand, the tomo of the Sage of Six Paths on his back. He had become the Jinchuriki of the 10 tails. He had become a god in truth. He looked down at Naruto and Sasuke, the living embodiments of Asura and Indra, the sons of the sage. He didn't see enemies. He saw flawed components of his grand design. You have both performed admirably, Madara said, his voice calm, yet it boomed across the world. Your little war is over. The time for games has passed. Now, let me show you the true meaning of divine power. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The Shore of a New World. The battlefield fell silent. The chaotic symphony of thousands of shinobi clashing was replaced by a single, terrifying note, the thrum of Madara Uchiha's newfound divinity. The armies, both the living and the dead, froze in place, their endiva. Dual struggles rendered utterly insignificant. The inland sea Naruto had created grew still, its surface a perfect mirror reflecting the image of the man who now floated above it, a being who had transcended the very concepts of life and death, of chakra and jutsu. He was an endpoint, the final, terrifying answer to the question of what ultimate power looked like. Sasuke's perfect Susanoo, the vibrant purple god of chakra that had seemed so invincible moments before, now looked like a child's toy. Naruto's army of water, a force that had overwhelmed tens of thousands, now seemed like a collection of harmless puddles. Insignificant, Madara said, his voice echoing not in their ears, but directly in their minds. He looked down at the two boys who were the reincarnations of his ancient rivals. Your squabble is a footnote in a history that I am about to erase. The world has failed, again and again, to find peace. I will grant it that which it cannot achieve on its own. A perfect, unending dream. He raised his black staff, and 10 ebony orbs, the truth-seeking orbs, materialized behind him, humming with the power to nullify all creation. He flicked a wrist. One of the orbs shot downwards, not with the speed of a projectile, but with the terrifying inevitability of a collapsing star. Sasuke reacted instinctively, his Susanoo raising its great chakra shield. The orb touched it. There was no explosion, no impact. The Susanoo's shield simply ceased to exist. The orb passed through, and the colossal avatar's entire arm disintegrated into nothingness, the purple energy unmade. Sasuke gasped, clutching the stump of his own arm as the feedback seared through him. Another orb shot towards Naruto. He reacted not with a wall, but with a vortex, commanding a massive whirlpool to rise from the sea to intercept it. The orb touched the water, and the vortex vanished, the water itself turning to steam and then to nothing, leaving a perfect, spherical hole in the sea that went all the way to the dry earth below. Every shinobi watching felt a cold, absolute despair grip them. Their most powerful techniques, the very ninjutsu that defined their world, were less than nothing to this man. He didn't counter their power, he erased it. You see, Madara's voice filled their minds again. Your power is chakra. I am now beyond chakra. I command the laws of nature themselves. You cannot fight a law. You can only obey. Quote. He began to float higher, the sky itself seeming to bend around him. He was preparing the final jutsu, the infinite Tsukuyomi, to cast the entire world into his perfect dream. Naruto looked at Sasuke, who was struggling to maintain his broken Susanoo, his face pale with a mixture of pain and disbelief. All his life, Sasuke had sought power. He had betrayed his village, embraced darkness, and achieved a level of strength few in history had ever known. And it was worthless. In that shared moment of absolute powerlessness, their rivalry, the feud that had spanned generations, finally burned away, leaving only a stark, simple clarity. He's right, Sasuke breathed, his voice ragged. We can't touch him. Any chakra we use is just deleted. Naruto looked at his own hands. He looked at the vast sea he had created, at the water that still obeyed his will. He remembered the sanctum in Uzushiogakure. He remembered the prophecy. The 9 tails was a lock, an anchor, to bind his overflowing divine power to his mortal body. He wasn't just a wielder of a unique chakra. His power wasn't a technique. It was a state of being. His orbs erase ninjutsu, Naruto said, his voice steady. A calm anchor in Sasuke's storm of despair. They erase things made of chakra. He met Sasuke's gaze, his blue eyes glowing with a dawning, terrifying idea. But my water, it's not a jutsu. It's just water. Sasuke's eyes widened as he understood. It was an insane gamble, a logical leap based on a premise that defied everything they knew about the world. But it was the only thing they had left. Your Susanoo, Naruto said, a plan forming with the speed and clarity of a lightning strike. It's a perfect vessel, a container of immense power. But it's empty. What are you saying? Sasuke asked, the pain forgotten in the face of this desperate hope. I'm saying, fill it up. Sasuke didn't hesitate. He poured the last of his strength into his avatar, the broken Susanoo solidifying. Its form wavering but holding. It's all I have left. It's enough, Naruto said. He stepped forward, placing his hand on the Susanoo's massive leg. Trust me. He closed his eyes and opened the floodgates. The ocean he had created rose as one. The entire inland sea, a body of water that contained the volume of 100 rivers, surged upwards, not as a wave, but as a single, coherent mass. It did not crash against the Susanoo. It flowed into it. The great purple avatar became a mold, a vessel for the raging sea. The water poured into its ethereal form, filling it, compacting, pressurizing, until the chakra construct glowed with an impossible, brilliant blue. It was no longer a god of chakra. It was a god of the ocean, a colossal golem of divine water given form and purpose by the Uchiha's will. The oceanic Susanoo stood, its broken arm reforming not of purple energy, but of a swirling vortex of hyper-dense water. Madara, high above, paused in his preparations. A flicker of genuine curiosity on his divine face. A novel combination, but ultimately, futile. He sent 2 truth-seeking orbs down to erase the new creation. Now, Sasuke, Naruto yelled, his mind linked with the Uchihas in a perfect fusion of power and control. Sasuke commanded, and the oceanic Susanoo moved. It met the 2 orbs not with a shield, but with 2 fists of pure, divine water. The orbs struck, and this time, they did not erase. They met a substance that was not a product of the sage's chakra, but a fundamental force of the world itself. The orbs were stopped, held at bay by the sheer, implacable pressure of the sea. For the first time, a look of shock appeared on Madara's face. He can't erase it. Jiraiya roared from the command post, his voice filled with a wild, triumphant hope. The boy's power isn't ninjutsu. It's senjutsu of a kind we've never seen. It's the planet's own life force. The oceanic Susanoo charged. Madara, his invincibility shattered, was forced to defend himself. His truth-seeking orbs forming a desperate shield. The battle was rejoined, but the terms had changed. It was no longer a god against mortals. It was god against god. Divinity born of a stolen tree against divinity born of the endless sea. The Susanoo's every blow landed with the force of a continental shelf collapsing. The water that comprised its form was not a weapon, it was an argument. It was relentless, formless, patient. It did not seek to shatter Madara's shield, it sought to wear it down, to find every microscopic crack, to seep into every defense and expand until it broke. This was not a battle of explosions. It was a battle of erosion. Naruto, his consciousness fused with the Susanoo, focused all his will into a single concept. He wasn't trying to defeat Madara. He was trying to dissolve him. He pushed his divine essence, the very concept of the sea, into Madara's own being. He felt the 10 tails, a creature of the earth and the tree, Rico. Ill from the salt and the pressure of the abyss. Madara screamed, a sound of fury and disbelief. His god-like form began to falter, his truth-seeking orbs flickering as his control waned. He was an unmovable mountain. But he was being worn away by an endless tide. I am the world's savior. He roared, unleashing a final, desperate blast of power. The oceanic Susanoo met it with a final, crushing wave. The 2 forces collided, and for a moment, the world was white. When the light faded, the oceanic Susanoo was gone, its power expended. Sasuke and Naruto lay on the damp earth, battered and exhausted, but alive. High above, Madara Uchiha floated, his form flickering, the 10 tails raging within him, on the verge of being ripped from his body. He was defeated. With a final look of cold, aristocratic fury, he was consumed by the very power he had sought to master, his body crumbling away until nothing was left. The war was over. The white Zetsu army dissolved into inert matter. The Edo Tensei souls, their contract broken, glowed with a soft light and ascended, their faces finally at peace. A quiet, breathless silence fell over the vast, waterlogged plain. The allied shinobi forces stared, not at a victory, but at a miracle. In the days that followed, the world began to heal. The allied shinobi forces disbanded, not as enemies, but as survivors who had stared into the abyss together. The inland sea that Naruto had created remained, a permanent monument to the war, a new landmark on the maps of the world. Sasuke left. There was no confrontation, no final battle. He stood, with Naruto on a cliff overlooking the new sea as the sun set. The world still needs to be changed, Sasuke said, his voice quiet. My path is not yours. I cannot protect it from the light, as you do. I will protect it from the shadows. My own way. Naruto nodded. He understood. Just don't get lost in them, Sasuke. Sasuke allowed a small, faint smile. Dobi. He turned and walked away, not a traitor, not a missing nin, but a wanderer, a shadow knight for a world he had once sought to rule. Naruto did not become Hokage. He rejected the title, and the council, now led by a humbled and deeply changed Kakashi, did not argue. His role was different. He was not a leader of a village. He was a guardian of the balance, a force of nature that the world now knew existed. He became a living treaty. His very presence a deterrent to any who would seek to start another war. He found his own peace, not in a title or in the roar of a crowd, but in the quiet moments. He stood on a cliff near the coast of the Land of Fire. overlooking the endless, rhythmic expanse of the true ocean. The wind was clean, the air tasted of salt, and the sun was warm on his face. "I thought I might find you here," a soft voice said. Hinata walked up beside him, a gentle smile on her face. She stood with him, her presence a quiet, comfortable warmth. She didn't look at him with awe or fear. She looked at him with love, an emotion as deep and as patient as the sea itself. "It's quiet," he said, looking out at the horizon. The storm that had raged inside him his entire life was gone. The sea within was calm, its surface like glass, reflecting the endless blue of the sky. He was no longer a monster, no longer a weapon, no longer a god to be feared. He was just Naruto. "Yes," she said, her hand finding his. "It is." He looked down at their joined hands, then back to the horizon. The world was safe. For now. New storms would undoubtedly gather, new tides would rise and fall. But he would be here to meet them. His watch was not over. It was just beginning. But for the first time in his life, he would not be facing the storm alone. Chapter 10 End.